Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to play my stream to intro to get you guys in here, and thanks for tuning in today. I hope you guys have been keeping up on my recent videos. I've done a lot of good ones, some of them of which have led to some interesting, fiery debates in some other people's discords. Thanks to Tam sharing them in places where people don't like critical thinking. You naughty girl, you. Anyway, I had to push this one back for scheduling reasons, and now we're good to go. Some of you may remember Shawn. He's from I think it was called. Well, I'll let him explain when he comes on. But anyway, he was on Logical Checkmate, and people wanted me to talk to him, so that's what I'm gonna do now. So. In any case, please, if you have not already, consider going to my website, hy dot page slash vradio, where you can find all of my other mediums because a lot of my videos don't stay on YouTube very long. Because, well, to be somewhat fair to YouTube in some instances, I do use a lot of raw footage that in many cases is very violent. And I don't do that for the sake of like gratuitous violence, but it's because people need to see things in the real. They need to see things in their totality, and in the rawness. And I think that that's really the only way we're going to get to the point that people can really digest what's going on and not just take the cookie cutter prepared version of reality that the mainstream media has in mind for you. So, I've also been on a couple of other streams recently. Sitch and Adam had me on a couple times, and Good Logic had me on again. Most of that was about the topic of the pedophiles that have been popping up in the education um, sector, specifically the kinds of people who are advocating for sexual education seem to unfortunately also in some cases have nefarious purposes. So that stuff is definitely very contentious. And just a reminder, obviously the algorithm doesn't even like it if you say words like that. So I do anyway. My stuff is unfiltered. Like you see a lot of people like they won't even say the word pedophile. They won't say, anything. And the reason why is because YouTube they will either demonetize or they will limited monetize your stuff. So I get very little money from YouTube itself, unless you guys are super chatting me or whatever. It's pretty much pennies. And I appreciate every one of you. Patreon is really kind of like the only compensation I get for any of this. And when I say that, it's also to point out that I buy all the equipment, I pay for the StreamYard prescription, I continue to have a business class internet to be sure that my streams are good. And all of that costs money. So I'm not in this to make a ton of money. But if you do appreciate my work, particularly since the kind of work that I do is not really going to be monetized, I was kind of surprised they remonetized me in the first place because they demonetized me. Then suddenly, a few weeks later, emailed me and remonetized me. And I didn't even apply to be remonetized. I had just kind of given up on it, but they did it. So here we are. We're going to go back into the Kyle Rittenhouse rabbit hole today. It's been a little while since I've discussed this topic, and it's not because I don't care about it. It's just because, I think a lot of it's kind of been done. I actually had to sit down and rewatch my old documentary, which really needs to be revised. But I think people who are better at editing that stuff will end up doing something like that. My main objective was to try to be able to create a timeline that people could follow that would account for Kyle's presence. And I think I achieved that. And, it was important when it was there. So, anyway, I'm going to bring on my guest. I'm going to have him introduce himself. And I want to be clear, guys. I don't expect I don't expect yelling and screaming fireworks. Like the stuff that went on with Kevin Glowicki is unusual for me. I don't usually raise my voice at all, like during debates. I'm not into that. There are some people that are in the Twitchosphere, for example, like this Samantha individual. That's like their whole MO. I'm not interested in that kind of stuff. I don't think it's productive. But inevitably, oh, look at that super chat from Anti-Commie. Thanks, Anti-Commie. Because I've missed you so much. Well, have you been keeping up on my videos? I'm still making content. I just haven't been streaming. But anyway, I've done a bunch of videos that you should see if you haven't already, Anti-Commie. But anyway, and there are people that just for some reason seem to get just like a pass to act like that, and I'm just not interested in it. And it's not because I'm worried about my feelings getting hurt or whatever. It's that it just becomes unproductive. The reason the Kevin Glowicki thing became productive was because I was able just to demonstrate very clearly that somebody who was literally physically present did not have a good handle on what actually had taken place that night. And that's unfortunate, but true. I don't expect to, have better insight than everybody. I actually talked to Grambo today, and I talked to Nathan DeBruin today. Nathan said he might be available for a little while. Grambo unfortunately has to work right now. About possibly coming on to talk, but I don't want to ambush Shawn. That's not how I would do things. Just like I would like Shawn to be in a situation where maybe he could ask the people that were actually present and on the ground to talk to them. So my attitude about things is that I don't really want to have a lot of blood sport debating. I want to have real exchanges of information that are hopefully productive. And that's the reason why you can see me on a channel like, say, Good Logic. He and I don't agree about a lot of things politically, but you would never, think that we weren't friends. That's why I have on people I don't always agree with. That's why I go on the streams with people I don't agree with. I don't agree with that. I'm friended about everything, So I honestly think that if you guys are watching my channel, what I want from you guys is for you to also start to be able to engage with people that you don't necessarily agree with all the time. You know, that's something that I think is important just to society as a whole. It's not just about like whether or not, you like we can discuss things like, do you approve of Medicare for all or whatever, after we've, resumed our ability to have cognitively, you know, based intelligent discussion. You know, that is so much more important, man. And I would agree, Nova. It's hard to debate people who don't swallow reality. And that's one of the problems is that I still encounter people like there was some twit the other day on Twitter, play on words, I guess, twit on Twitter, who was still saying that Kyle Rittenhouse shot black people. Like the amount of misinformation that went into this is what motivated me to do this because I'm not a conservative. I am very big on pro-gun and pro-self-defense, and I am also very anti-riot. That used to be the position of left activists. For some reason, it isn't anymore. But anyway, like I said, I'm going to bring on Shawn. I'm going to let him introduce himself, and then we'll get started. Please make sure you like, subscribe, ring the bell, smack that like button. Thanks to Logical Checkmate who dropped into the chat. Good to see you, Paul. Share the stream because the algorithm doesn't like the truth. So it's really, really the only way that people even find out about me most of the time is through being shared. That's why you end up with situations like big names like Brett Weinstein or whatever know who I am, but I have like 4,000 subscribers. Thanks again, folks. Oh, Tiffany. Hi, Tiffany. I haven't seen you in forever, man. Good to see you, Tiffany. All right. Hey, Shawn. Welcome to V Radio. You are muted, Shawn. You are now unmuted, Shawn.
There we go. How we doing? Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. Nice introduction.
Thanks, man. So actually, why don't you take a moment, because I do this for every guest. Can you take a moment to kind of explain who you are? And in specific, was there a precipice moment for you that made you decide, you know what, I don't just want to be like a casual observer. I'd like to try to get more involved and, maybe affect the world a little more?
It's a question I'm debating to this very day, whether I do want to be involved in any conversations. I think this whole thing started, and I think you're aware, but some of you people wouldn't be aware. I'm an American expat living in the United Kingdom. I've been here for 16 years. And when I started a YouTube channel, it was to keep in touch with a good friend of mine who is on my channel, Speakeasy Reviews. And we generally do true crime, and we do sometimes wander into specific cases within true crime, and one of which was Kyle Rittenhouse. Now, I do have thoughts that I do want to share. I do want to get out there because I do struggle with the current discourse in America more so than anywhere else, but it is happening here in the United Kingdom, where people are going into their echo chambers and they're incapable of seeing another side of a position or point of view and looking at it as a logical outcome, even though I disagree with it. And I think sometimes I have this desire to want to get in there and ask questions because I don't believe people actually believe, let's say, all Democrats want the world to burn to hell and all Republicans are racist. I don't think people really believe that, or at least most people don't. Usually you have the outliers, the activists, the extremes. And I think this Kyle Rittenhouse case we picked up, and I think this is how we got in touch. I did the Kyle Rittenhouse case, and somebody who you were on a stream with, Johnny Walker Dread, commented on one of my videos, and we had a bit of an exchange, back and forth, and somehow we ended up. I think I reached out to him, and we ended up doing a stream with Logical. Hey, Logical, good to see you in the chat. And I think that's kind of how we've gotten here. I have done a lot of reading and research on the Second Amendment and guns, and having lived in a country for the last 16 years where there really is not much of a gun culture. I find this whole conversation fascinating because I feel like I'm living on another planet. But I feel like this Kyle Rittenhouse case is a microcosm of everything that's going on in America when it comes to sort of political discourse. The debate on guns, it kind of covers everything. And I find that fascinating.
I don't disagree with that. And I actually kind of agree in a lot of ways. And actually going back and rewatching my video, I think kind of brings some of that into perspective. A microcosm in a lot of ways, maybe almost like there was something somebody once told me in Occupy Flint, actually. It was an artist named Joe, and he said, we are the pain signal for society. Like, as in it's an indication that, something is wrong. I think that my biggest problem is that people's consciousness of what takes place seems to get divided up based upon what they believe their tribal uh, place is. Like, as in, well, I'm on this team or I'm on that team.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, like I would agree with you that a lot that people don't say that all Republicans are racist, for example. If it weren't for the fact that now I'm watching that attitude be brought into people who are not plugged in, like to what you and I are doing. They're all people who are just normal people, like non-political people are saying stuff just like that. Like I have friends in my real life, and I have now former friends in my real life who won't talk to me anymore because of the content of my channel. And it's really affecting them. Like I have one friend who honestly believes that the border patrol was going to help Trump take over the country. Like that's some crazy like Blue Anon level stuff. I'm like, where the hell did you hear that? Like what? Like again, like but he believes that stuff, and then it's insane to me because that's why I'm concerned that there is a real problem. Is that they do believe that Republicans are fascists. They do believe Republicans are all white supremacists. Even when you like watch January 6th footage and there's, a huge presence of blacks for Trump. There's a whole bunch of Asian people, Hispanic people, but no, it's a big white supremacist thing. But there are people who really seem to need to believe that, and the truth is just not important to them. And that's the Kyle Rittenhouse incident is really no exception. I feel that they feel that they need to line up on whichever side they believe their perceived tribe is supposed to take on that matter, and then the truth at that point be damned. And if you argue in favor or against anything, even if you are telling the truth, it just doesn't matter anymore. Like are you representing my side enough? Like, it's bad for you to talk about the things that went on that may have been true, but they make our side look bad. So whose side are you on? That was what motivated me, because again, I'm a left-leaning guy. Like, and I got started on this, and I'm like, like when I made that documentary, I was just like, Jesus, people are lying. They're lying again and again and again about really simple, stupid things. It's like, no, he never just randomly fired into the crowd. That never happened. Like every shot the dude, the kid fired is accounted for. There are other people shooting that we still don't like even know who they are. There are shots that are unaccounted for, but they're not from him. because
Yeah.
cameras are on him, like from the first shot all the way until he gets to the cops. But people still believe that shit. And it's because, unfortunately, like, MSNBC has their version of it that their audience wants to hear, and then Fox has their version of it that their audience wants to
Yeah.
hear. And truth is optional. That's and unfortunately, like, at least on this channel, for me, that's one of the reasons I don't really do a lot of right versus left, because I just don't think it's as important right now as our ability as a society to think clearly. Like, I think actually Paul made a fantastic point once when he
Mm.
was on my show, was like, how the hell are Americans going to make any reasonable decisions about, say, healthcare or, other things, if we can't even, like, have honest conversations about basic events, like,
Yeah.
and he's not wrong. And that's really what bothers me is, ironically, I end up being somebody who is perceived to shit on the left a lot. I'm like, well, yeah, because the left is screwing up a lot right now, man. I was like, somebody has to call them out. It was like, well, when are you going to talk bad about Trump or whatever? I'm like, I do talk bad about him when you're talking about something that actually happened, like, or, something that I do agree with. But that's part of the problem, is that they lie about the guy so much. It's hard to have a conversation with people about what I genuinely oppose about him, because they're so, at this point, they're just so used to getting lied to about him, and that goes both ways. I'm not saying that it doesn't, but like, the biggest, like, the biggest victim in the situation is literally the truth itself,
Yeah.
and I can't stand that shit, and there are leftists who agree with me. Like, I remember when I had Derek Jensen on, he's a longtime author, left-leaning anarchist, and when I brought it up, he was like, just like taken aback, because he agreed with me, but he literally just never talked to anybody about it, because um you don't talk about that stuff on the left. Nobody
Yeah.
wants to discuss whether or not Kyle Rittenhouse, was defending himself or not.
And I
So
think part of
go
that,
ahead.
this case very much was one that, and I was a discerning media watcher, just because that you have media is where you get information, and I think we're in a day and age where we don't know how the hell to decipher information, or disseminate it, or fact check it. And this case really highlighted how the narrative outside of the courtroom was being played out, and I'm saying that for both sides, both the right and the left leaning media. And it was highly inaccurate, and it was eye opening as far as how and where I get my content. I know that when I was doing further research on this, I abandoned media and YouTube, because I needed to know what the source was. I needed to be able to check who was the source. Did they have experience being at the riot or at riots? How long have they been police officers? Who is this person giving me this information? And I think people aren't very good at figuring that out now, and I think it's a skill that we have to learn in this sort of time of social media. People tend to take things in that suit their narrative, and then they buy that much sooner than they would something they disagree with. And
Right,
even for
and
me,
they don't want to review anything that might change their minds, and they have all kinds of ways to get out of that too. Like, there's, oh, well, you linked a YouTube video. That's one of my favorites. I'm like, YouTube is a video platform. That's all it
yeah,
is. YouTube does not make something less or more credible by virtue of being on YouTube.
no,
That's like saying you linked a radio show. Okay, it's an
yeah,
audio recording,
yeah,
like, that's, and I get where you would want to investigate the sources, but that's why I exhaustively put, like, if you ever look at the description of my videos, sometimes
yeah,
there's like 12 to 20 links to back up everything I just said. People don't bother to do that. I want to highlight this point here. I believed a crazy racist offed 3 innocents until I watched the videos, and ironically, dirt cheap, that is exactly what I thought too before I made the documentary. So I get it. That I had expected somebody to shoot one of these violent mobs quite a while ago, because actually, I think the final straw for me was watching that guy get kicked in the head in Portland by I think the kid's name was like Marquis Love or something like that. They kicked this guy in the head. I'm like, Jesus Christ, somebody's going to shoot somebody at one of these things. That's what's going
mm,
to end up happening, and so when I went into it, I went into it assuming, okay, well, some crazy guy finally shot someone, and the situation did not evolve like that when I studied it, and then it became more important to me that people knew the truth, and that's just not how people want to conduct anything anymore. It's I remember the analogy that I use frequently is, have you ever played, like, say, volleyball in middle school when you're all
Yeah.
kids, and like the coach, not the coach, the phys ed teacher, he sees the ball come down, but maybe he doesn't see that the ball was out. So he
Yeah.
calls a point for your team, and your team just goes quiet. Like, you're not going to say anything,
You're not going to
even though
say shit.
full
No, no,
well
no.
that that point is not real. I'm not going to say anything,
That's life
because,
and death in middle school. Winning
well, right.
volleyball,
And
PE volleyball.
unfortunately, that's kind of how our politics have become.
Yeah.
It's like, if there is evidence that shows something we don't like, we're not going to say anything. We're not going to go out of our way, for example, to talk about, you know, bad things that Biden has done if we're on the left, or bad things that Trump has done if we're on the right. That's, and that's what really bothers me, is that as society moves forward, if we lose our ability to comprehend what's really going on, it undermines everything. Like, now we want to, like, remove objective truth from things like mathematics. We want to remove, like, we want to say that the STEM fields are all systemically racist or whatever, or run by racists. So we need to just throw out all of our research, and everything just needs to go. And if somebody feels something, then that's their truth, and you need to give their truth weight, even if what they're saying doesn't make a damn bit of sense at all. And it's not just a question of, like, whether or not that makes anybody upset. There are some things that are either true or not, and how you feel about them is secondary to that. Like, you may not like that somebody who shares your political views did something you don't like. That doesn't mean that it isn't true. you know so I guess what I wanted to get into specifically, now that we've kind of, like, set the stage, um you had some specific concerns that you were debating with Paul. And I guess, now, especially since you said, you've had more time to think on it since we had to postpone this show, where are you at with what happened in Kenosha, with what Kyle Rittenhouse did, with what the other armed fellows and ladies did there, on both sides, because both sides were armed,
Yeah.
and how you feel about the topic, and we'll take it from there.
And this will be an interesting challenge because I did rewatch the chat. I love the chat. It makes me laugh. I like it when people are ripping into me. I think it's great. I love the whole discourse. But this is where we start to challenge whether my perception is something that can be considered valid. Because, when I had that chat with Paul, I really enjoyed speaking to Paul because he was listening to what I was saying and he was considering my points. And I think when you go through the chat, I have to acknowledge I am in, even here to a degree, I am going to be in a bit of an echo chamber because of the people that do follow you as far as how it relates to Kyle Rittenhouse. So I'm happy to share my views and I'm happy to consider other people's views. But I think where I hope this conversation goes is we are considering each other's points of view is not necessarily right or wrong, but we have different perspectives on the facts. Not that the facts are different, but how we perceive the facts and how we use that information to move forward. Saying that, Kyle Rittenhouse, I think if I look at Kyle Rittenhouse, I don't think we disagree much on Kyle Rittenhouse and his intentions to be there. Would you say that's accurate from what you've heard from me?
Well, because we haven't talked as much about this as you and Paul did, maybe you should go ahead and, for the sake of steel manning, go ahead and say it out loud now, so that we're not,
Okay.
so I'm not agreeing to
So
something and then some comment comes up, just go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. Kyle Rittenhouse shot black people. That's the next thing I'm going to say. No.
Right.
So Kyle Rittenhouse, I think, was a young, impressionable kid who was very much, I think he wanted to be in law enforcement. I don't know enough information about, anything that, there was a lot of allegations about his association with far right groups, and there was no real evidence that I could see to support that. I could just see, really, when I watched the videos in the trial, a scared kid who was trying to help somebody and to fulfill a fantasy. And as we all are when we're 17, we kind of in our heads envision things going differently than they do. And I think Kyle Rittenhouse very much wanted to be a part of that. He wanted to help Kenosha. He was very connected to the city, to the town of Kenosha. And I think I fully agree that he acted in self-defense. I feel like he needed to act in self-defense because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he should have never been there. I will unequivocally say that he had no business being there, and I will continue to say that. Even independent of my views on whether anybody with a gun, ex-cop, ex-military, whatever, should have been there, he specifically should not have been there and in and amongst that group. So I don't think he's somebody who should be in jail right now. But at the same time, I don't, I look at him now as somebody who is a terrible example. If I was a gun owner in America, I would not want him to be my poster boy, just because he I think opens up a lot of conversation and dialogue that are counterintuitive to what the quote Second Amendment crowd wants. I think it adds more fuel to the fire from people who want to see more restrictions and regulations coming in. So that's my overall view on Kyle Rittenhouse. Was that a fairly comprehensive yet succinct
Yeah.
portrayal?
My views on whether or not he should have been there are kind of. I think it's important that first of all, we got to lay down what was really happening, because one of the problems that I frequently have when discussing this is that the conversation about wrongdoing seems to chronologically begin the moment Kyle Rittenhouse arrives, not everything that led to that. Like
I agree with
why
that.
were citizens there?
No, and I agree with that. And the thing that I pulled, because I've been watching the trial over again, and just to comment, Nova, yes, I did watch the trial. I haven't watched every single second of it, but I watched, I'd say, 60 to 70%. So there may be some things I'm missing. And yes, I do have an opinion. So when I talk about the public being there, the one theme that I think, and this is my view on it, and this is what the people who were quote in the militia, or people who were there to protect people, who went there with the intention. I'm going to be charitable and say everybody who came there as part of the quote Kenosha militia was there with good intent. I'm not going to make any arguments that there could be somebody there who who wasn't necessarily planning to protect, but let's assume they all were. I For me, there was definitely rioting going on, but everybody who in the trial was talking about the crowd. Ryan Baugh, Kyle Rittenhouse in his testimony, Richie McGinnis, Kristen Harris. I'm trying to think who else. There was a few others who all of them said that the protesters weren't the problem. It was a small group of rioters, and that was something that was from the people who were there with the guns to protect the shops. So I don't think what I want to be careful of is I don't want to say Black Lives Matter was the issue, because I don't know that and you don't know that. But we do know that there was a group of people that were there motivated to do harm. And a lot of them, it was found after the fact, a lot of people were arrested, weren't even from the area, who were there to riot and cause problems. So there was a big problem in Kenosha. And it wasn't because Kyle Rittenhouse. Kyle Rittenhouse was motivated because of the issues. They'd actually, there was the National Guard was called in before Kyle Rittenhouse showed up. So there was issues before he showed up.
Well, no, there absolutely was. I think where the disconnect would be is like when we say whether or not Black Lives Matter was in any way involved or responsible. That kind of brings me back to there's a lot of interesting hypocrisy in political discourse right now as far as to like what collective guilt is. Like as in, is Black Lives Matter responsible when people riot who happen to be part of one of their, demonstrations? They'll say, well, no, of course not. But all white people are apparently collectively responsible for things that happened before they were born, be things that happened after the people who were offended were dead. Like there's this weird like dichotomy that we can just kind of decide who is collectively responsible and who is not. When I was
But
part of
you're talking about
Occupy,
outliers, though. That is an outlier point of view. That is not
which part is an outlier? Like as far as to it's the outliers that say what I just said is that
So
people
do
are
you
collectively
think?
accountable.
So, and I didn't mean to speak over you. Apologies for that.
No, that's fine.
Um, if you just maybe to help me understand your position, if you were to go around and speak to, let's say, all over the country, let's say you were to poll 15,000 Black Lives Matter protesters, how many of them would be in support or would have advocated for rioting?
Well, that's actually the point I was going to get at next. I was part of a left-leaning activist movement that engaged in very active protests all over the country. We had a very strict nonviolence policy, And whenever something like that happened, we owned up for it and got on the media and released, did press releases to say, we do not support this. We condemn this. We are not okay with this. This is not us. The left doesn't do that anymore. So it's funny because it comes back to like when we're talking about hypocrisies, white silence is violence. But if they are silent, when Marquis Love kicked a guy in the head when literally functioning as what they called Black Lives Matter security, wandering around Portland, randomly finding white people to attack, which you can watch the video. Drew Hernandez uploaded the whole thing because people accused him of taking it out of context. Nobody really comes out and opposes it when it happens. Instead, they call it uprisings or like try to glorify it at worst, or at best, they try to like blame it on apparently white supremacists in disguise are responsible for all violence during these protests. And that's where the problem is. If they would just come out and publicly say, I oppose this, we as an organization oppose this, that would be different, but they don't. And if you suggest that they should, you're a racist.
I've
That's
heard a
that's
lot of
how it
Black
always
Lives
goes.
Matters, like people leading protests, say that very thing.
Which thing?
That they condemning violence, condemning riots. That's a fairly commonplace thing. I don't have anything I can share with you, but to me, if you were to ask me, I could be wrong about that, but that to me I would be surprised if nobody from who representing Black Lives Matter ever condemned violence or rioting.
Okay, I'm not saying nobody ever did. It's not in any way the face of the movement. I mean, like, did you watch the clip of Hawk Newsom stating, that there will be riots, there will be fires, and there will be bloodshed? You know
So
who he is?
keep in mind where I am geographically. Again, I have a different filter as far as what I see. So I haven't seen that. But
Okay.
I would need to be able to comment on that. Again, I believe you're debating or discussing in good faith, but I would still want to investigate that just to make sure that we're on the same page with that.
No, and that's fair, but I guess what I'm getting at is he's like literally the organizer for New York City Black Lives Matter. And then there are other
mm,
organizers who they're either dead quiet, like you don't see Black Lives Matter. I mean, mind you, they're a joke at this point because they've been discovered to be a grift, but they certainly never came out and said riots are bad. And then there's the people who like I was actually on a debate on Martin Luther King's daughter's Twitter where she said people take her out of context, or take him, meaning Black Lives, out of Martin Luther King out of context on the topic of riots. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He was openly, clearly against riots. And then everybody's like, no,
yeah.
no, no, he was actually on board with riots, blah, blah, blah. Towards the end there, like he was planning a riot at the Capitol. Like that's the kind of crap that I encountered. And those are
Can I
fairly
jump in
mainstream
on that point?
places. Yeah, go
And
ahead.
only because I want to comment on that Martin Luther King thing, because I think that's a great quote that really encompasses where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I see a lot of people who are in the chat, who are in other areas of discourse looking at Black Lives Matter, and that comment. So rioting, what was it? Rioting is the language of the, what was it?
They say, this is how they say it.
Yeah.
They say rioting is the language of the unheard, which they say that, and they don't bring up like the 10 minutes of him condemning riots before he says that.
But in
And then they
isolation,
tell us that we are taking him out of context.
but in isolation, that comment to me doesn't even say what she is saying it says. It is a standalone comment it's a commentary on how people who are rioting feel. It's not a support for or against rioting, even in isolation. So that to me, when you see a group of people, Black Lives Matters protesters, and let's say you think the organization is a grift or whatever, there is still a lot of people in this country that feel like they're isolated, and they feel so for just reasons. Yet we look at a lot of those people and just assume they're evil and nasty, and that's not necessarily the
Can you get
case.
more specific about which people you're talking about and why they feel that way?
As far as with the people, so let me be a bit clear. So when you talk about Black Lives Matters protesters, if we say it's a grift, people that assume Black Lives Matters protesters are all like anybody who riots or who's at a protest for Black Lives Matter. And this is not an endorsement of rioting. I don't support rioting. I think the police should have come down much more heavy-handed. There should have been more National Guard in Kenosha. So just to put that disclaimer before all the comments come in.
Sure.
But I'm just talking about the the understanding of why people are protesting, why people are taking knees. There's good, there's just reason for them to feel that way, whether it's right or wrong. They're not doing it out of they don't want to be protesting. They feel there's something that's unjust and they're not being heard, which I think is a legit way to feel about something. And I think nowadays we look at people that are protesting who are contrary to our views as being evil and wrong, instead of trying to understand why they feel the way they do. And instead we attack them, instead of taking time to understand their point of view. And that's where I have a problem. I think we look at a group and we label them, and then we don't engage with them.
Well, no, and I don't disagree with that. And when Black Lives Matter started, I was among I think the statistics were 70% support when it started, down to now 31% since the riots. The problem is that once we get into violence, it's full stop. That's when I'm over. It doesn't work. And it's not
Because it's
just
not even
because
really
of
organized, is it? It's not that tight of an organization. It's just a group of people that affiliate with an idea or an ideal.
Well, let's actually, because there are people asking me to kind of put this away. Let me point out a couple things. First of all, as far as whether or not it's a grift, Patrisse Cullors' baby daddy was paid nearly $1 million for what was labeled "quote unquote" creative work. As they have audited Black Lives Matter, they're finding out that these people paid huge salaries to themselves out of the money, and now all three of the primary founders are they all have net worths of 5 million plus, having started off as just communist college students. That's why people feel it's a grift. And in the meantime, actual functional, I would say, productive activists like Pastor Corey Brooks, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but
No.
he works in Chicago, a Black gentleman who goes out of his way to keep kids out of gangs, to get them into apprenticeships when they get out of school, to keep them out of prison. And if they do go to prison when they get out, to get them jobs and to keep them from going back in. A guy like that struggles for funding because, like that would, things would actually help improve those people's lives. And I think Black Lives Matter, what do? They built like some kind of planting domes where you can, plant crops or something in a couple of places. Like, and they were like, this is how we're helping people, take care of themselves. And literally, so that's why people feel it's a grift. I don't feel it's an alleged. It's a definitely at this point. There are individuals who may still have pure intentions in the middle of it, but even some of the most hardened or ardent Black Lives Matter people that I know of admit now that the national thing, which unfortunately is sitting on the vast majority of the money, is totally a grift.
Yeah.
And they're not spending it on anybody other than themselves. Like they're still sitting on the money and the IRS is waging it out. I cannot fathom what Patrisse Cullors' baby daddy did to earn $1 million. There's a lot of things that Pastor Corey Brooks could do with $1 million that would actually help people of color. And he's not getting any money from them. And the other thing is that it's important to note that many of the parents of some of these kids who've been shot are also kind of fed up. Like they're sick of the fact that Black Lives Matter shows up to do some speeches and some press conferences, push fundraising. There was a woman, actually, she lives somewhere in California, and they were doing fundraising saying it was for the funeral expenses for her kid, and she never saw a dime of it. Black Lives Matter did their ambulance chasing lawyer routine, showed up, grifted, and then disappeared. And she has been chastised by them because she openly calls them out. And she's very clear, very concise when she talks to people. It's really funny. You can see that on my stream. That's literally like a play on words because I put $signs wherever there were S's in the Black Lives Matter cash enterprise. So I don't make that comment willy-nilly. There's a lot of very real evidence to the effect that people got involved in that and are now making a lot of money. And it's not just for Black Lives Matter. It's racial activism in general is big business right now. So,
and I would say that the whole antithesis of this in Kenosha, I think the rally for Jacob Blake was really ill-informed. And I think when you look at that in hindsight, the people that showed up at that rally, a lot of good intentioned people were there. And there's, again, the people on trial who were on the other side of the fence said so. There was actually a weird kinship when you listen to the people on the other side talking about some of the protesters. And I think that was a very poorly informed protest to have, because in the end, I don't know that that was the best avenue to, I guess, put an offensive on, so to speak, in Kenosha, given the nature of that case and Jacob Blake and the nature of what happened there. I don't think that's a good example for, quote, Black Lives Matter to throw a lot of support into.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's another part of the problem. When people discuss the chronology of events, they don't discuss what started everything, and that was that Jacob Blake, a man who had an active rape warrant against him for third-degree sexual assault because he broke into a woman's house, forcibly digitally penetrated her without consent, threatened her, all while her child was laying sleeping next to her. She then went and got a restraining order against him. So the charges were still active at the time. They just hadn't apprehended him.
Yeah.
And then he's at her house violating said restraining order when the police are called because he's trying to leave with her car with her kids in it. And that's
Yeah.
why he got shot. No,
Yeah.
and so that's the face of the movement. But they, at the time, people involved with Black Lives Matter openly engaged in lying about it. They claimed that he was breaking up a fight, that he was actually happy the police had arrived. Some even suggested that he called the police for them, and that they just tried to arrest him because he was driving while black and he resisted. Like there were so many lies about it, and unfortunately, a lot of these incidents come up, and that's why when we come back to like, is there a justification for them to feel the way that they do? The question would be, how much of what is making those people angry due to inflation and exaggeration of the problem, sensationalizing of the problem in a manner similar to what they did with Jacob Blake? Jacob Blake is not a good person. Like, he's a piece of shit. And he came out pretty good because now he's a millionaire for resisting arrest while
He dropped
terrorizing
his
his rape
lawsuit
victim.
just recently, I thought.
Yeah, well, yeah, he did, but he's a millionaire because Black Lives Matter puts his name out there, and then
Right.
they dumped $1 million in his GoFundMe. So for being a man with an extensive history of terrorizing this woman, he turned out pretty good for getting shot in the back while resisting arrest with a knife.
It's not a good, it's not a, I think there are, and most people here may disagree with me, I think there are racial issues in America. I don't know, and that's not me saying anybody's racist, by the way, just to throw that out there. But I think there's an issue. I just don't know that was the same as I don't think Kyle Rittenhouse is the Second Amendment flag to, the hill to die on. I don't think Jacob Blake is the hill for people that are protesting police violence to die on. And I think that's where the problem started.
Well,
And you have,
go ahead. Well, yeah, go ahead and finish what you're saying.
I was going to say, I wasn't going to say anything of note. I was probably going to sort of stammer into the end and make people happy because I sound stupid.
So thanks to Grambo, who's in the chat. Zeminski out on bail. Judges recuperating from injury, so case was postponed. So the first shooter in the Kyle Rittenhouse incident still not being brought to justice. He also harassed Nathan De Bruin, and for some reason they won't charge him for that. So apparently, if you're Joshua Zeminski, I don't know what it is about that guy. You are immune to being prosecuted. He's got like a 9-page criminal record, and he's the one who fired the first shot, and for some reason is just still walking around, and he gets to intimidate and harass witnesses. I don't know what he has on the district attorney's office in Kenosha, but he just gets away with whatever.
Well, they've arrested 175 rioters, I think, to date.
Right.
And he's got more video on him than most of them. So, yeah, that is a bit surprising.
I don't understand it. It's so strange. And then some of the stuff that he has done in the past, he somehow just seems to be the king of plea bargains. Like he gets, no matter what he does, it's like they find some way to. That's why I was like, does he have something on somebody? Like, why is this guy getting treated with kid gloves? Because somebody like that shouldn't. We're talking about people who shouldn't have been there. Bringing around back to that, I guess. So to bringing around back to that first issue of whether or not Kyle should have been there, my question to you is, who should have been there?
So this is a complicated question because I was accused, and all the kind people in the chat are letting me know how I don't know what I'm talking about on the last show that I was on.
Right.
And I'm sure it'll happen here too. So there's a few things that we need to qualify really to be able to discuss this, because I need to look at this as if one, and I understand what you're going to say to this, but I'm just making this as a qualifier, and I am happy to talk about it in the other way. But first, we need to identify that anybody who showed up there with a gun to protect the city was breaking laws, multiple laws to do so. and I understand that there's motivation to do so, a just motivation to do so, but they were out past the curfew. And I think that's somewhat counterintuitive to what, let's say, if you have police that are trying to fix it, it's somewhat counterintuitive to the whole narrative of what we're trying to solve. People are there because of impartiality towards Black and white communities. And the next best solution will be to have Tom, Dick, and Delroy rocking up with their guns and their masks, and be allowed to stay out past curfew whilst the police are trying to round up all the BLM protesters, is a bit tone deaf. But that's not to say that the people there aren't there for good intention. But it's also illegal to be a militia in Wisconsin. It's illegal to be a vigilante, not in Wisconsin, in all 50 states. And that's another problem we have to get around, because it's antithetical to the Constitution even to have people sort of declare themselves martial law, because there's a lot of things that, if we assume the police had got their shit together, because Trump had said on the night of the 25th, I think, that he was going to marshal resources. I think the night that Kyle Rittenhouse defended himself, there was FBI resource there. There was a small amount of National Guard, not enough, and there was police presence, not prepared to deal with it. But let's say, the night that Kevin Mathewson, I think, was that the name of the
Kevin Mathewson, the guy from Kenosha County I.
So when he put the APB out to anybody who has a gun and wants to protect their country, come out. At that point, that compromises or changes any police strategy. If you have police that are working in a just fashion, that compromises their ability to then do a good job. They are now in the way, and they are bringing weapons to a war zone. There's never a good time to bring a gun to a riot. So there's a lot of things I have to overcome to say, yeah, you know what, militia going to a riot's a great idea. And that's and for everybody in the chat that thinks that's full of shit, that's just my good faith understanding. That's my belief. So I don't think anybody there was going there, and I'll be open to that. Anybody who shut up with a gun, I will concede that they were there in good conscience.
So to push back on that, then I know you watched some of my videos, and you watched my debates, for example, with Not a Lawyer. I don't know if you watched my Paul Katz videos before he changed his views on things. But Wisconsin law actually states that you are allowed to defend yourself and your property, and you are allowed to defend yourself, the person or property of a third person. That's why none of those people were charged for that. It's also why when the cops pulled up on them, they said, we really appreciate what you guys are doing. And that's why they didn't act against them. You are allowed to defend property and the property of others. That's the reason why none of those charges were laid either. The question, and I think like you kind of went back with Paul on some of this as well, was that it's not an ideal situation. In an ideal world, enough police would have been present to actually quell the riot. The problem is that aside from the politics of the situation, what was mostly pursued throughout the course of the riots of 2020 was a very hands-off approach. People have different views as to why. I know Kevin Glowicki reported that he was told that the police were more or less told to stand down. And that sounds correct. And when they say, like, when you're talking about all these assets that were present, they certainly weren't doing anything. That's the car source got completely destroyed. They destroyed other businesses. It honestly kind of felt like maybe some ranchers keeping a group of cows in a certain area, but not really paying attention to what the cows are doing, because there wasn't really any opposition to the systematic destruction of Kenosha. There wasn't any opposition that happened. When you're talking about, like, one of the things that I know, for example, was the final straw for people like Grambo was when they broke an elderly man's jaw, while he was trying to put a fire out in his furniture store. The rioters that were present, I feel, if we're going to discuss any inappropriate behavior, I don't understand why the conversation never starts with them. And you have openly said that you agree that rioting is wrong. But when a citizen is left in that situation wherein the police are not doing anything, maybe they can't, maybe they don't have enough resources. That is why we have a Second Amendment right to defend ourselves, and Wisconsin law says you have a right to defend your property. is because of the fact they can't be everywhere, and so it comes down to how, if we're not supposed to show up, and the reason they were armed, and I'm sure I've shown you the video of literally Black Lives Matter protesters with AR-15s shooting them at police Bearcats. There's plenty of pictures of people with pistols among the Black Lives Matter protesters. They're armed because they don't want to end up like the guy who had his jaw broken the night before, who was not armed. They're armed because they don't want to end up like Marquis Love's victim in Portland, like 2 weeks before the shooting. And I don't think for any reason that anybody is obligated to make it easier for rioters to kill them or to hurt them. So they're in an ideal circumstance. Yeah, you could have the police do more. So here's the problem with that loaded issue. Police response to riots, if you want to shut them down, you're looking at water cannons, proactive use of batons. In the past, they don't do this anymore, but they use dogs. It's not pretty. And there really is no way to come out of it without more accusations of criminal police brutality. Nobody would have been happy with what would be necessary to shut that riot down. It's a no-win situation. And so the theory that they have is that you just let them burn it out and get it over with, and then eventually they'll be done, and then they feel that works better. I don't tend to agree, but at the same time, one of the things that I've noticed as all of this has evolved is that even very moderate people, whether they're Republicans or Democrats that I know of, because of the endless waves of riots and violence that went on, I think it was well over 500 riots in 2020 alone that were treated in this way, people have become more and more comfortable with very draconian measures that would be necessary to deal with these problems. People who would have been aghast, for example, at the idea of federal officers apprehending people in Portland and shipping them off are now like, yeah, take those people to Guantanamo, get them the hell out of here. They're domestic terrorists. That's the consequence of this long period of time where people have just been free to do whatever the hell they want, destroy anybody's property, hurt anybody they want, and that's where the problem is that you ask yourself, okay, so now what is the citizen to do? Just like the rooftop Korean, in the riots in LA. But what is the option? So what are you suggesting then? What would have been better would have been for the citizens to do nothing and just continue to allow that mob to destroy the city because the police weren't stopping them.
Well, I think when you say that, would the police have allowed the city to continue to be burned down, I guess, over the next 3 nights? That probably wouldn't have happened because there would have been more National Guard employed, but there would have been a fuck ton more damage, which I agree with. And I think, going back, there's a lot to unpack there with what you've said.
Sure.
And if we take a look at the Second Amendment as sort of a starting point, and we take a look at Wisconsin law, I think the reason they weren't prosecuted is Wisconsin law does specifically state militias cannot act, in place of the police. And that's been a common theme throughout history, even from the creation of the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment only became a personal right to bear arms, construct in 2008. It was the first time the Supreme Court ever made any reference to the Second Amendment to the right to bear arms, which is documented throughout history. So we've changed what the Second Amendment was, because there was always an understanding that Second Amendment was to protect the country from being overthrown. If you look back at England, people were scared shitless of armies, which is why militias were so well thought of. But militias have always acted with a mandate from the state, always. So I think the reason they got away with it was how poorly organized the Wisconsin militia was. It was not organized at all. Somebody threw an all points bulletin out to anybody who wanted to bring a gun and protect a shop. That's not an organized militia. That's somebody who's claiming to be an organized militia, asking a bunch of people who want to come out and do good. And I think that's,
just so I understand, we're framing it now on the issue of whether or not militias are allowed to exist. Because my question was, what do private citizens do, whether in cooperation or not?
I personally, I don't want to see, if I had a shop, I wouldn't want to see anybody go into marshal themselves as police. The only time I think, when you're comparing it to Korea, so just to unpack that, the Koreatown incident that Logical raised with me, I think that's different to people showing up to, and this is where the law is very specific, and this is why I'm surprised they haven't been arrested. The law is very specific that you cannot marshal yourself and act in place of the police. That is Wisconsin statute. That is law in every state. Where the Koreatown, they were defending their own shops. I think for the people that went to so let's say the car source. Let's say the car source invited them to protect the location, and they went up on the roof and they protected that location. I think there's a little bit of latitude there with that. But I have an issue with people coming in place of the police, specifically the way that they were called to do so by Kevin Mathewson. It was, that's something I have a big problem with, because I think that put Kenosha in greater danger. It was, hey, anybody who wants to come and, with their gun. That was also a call out to anybody who, let's say, wanted to protect the Black Lives Matter protesters, because there was people there with guns as well. So I think it's a complicated thing. And to just say, if, let's say, the city's breaking down, it's incumbent on citizens to look at that, make a judgment as to what the police are doing, and then rock up with their guns. I think it's a lot more complicated than that.
So, okay, I guess then you're saying they put themselves in there as police, but what gives you that impression? Because they certainly didn't behave like police. They stayed out specifically in front of the car source properties for the most part. Kyle wandered around asking people if perhaps they would like medical attention, and he put out fires. So what specifically would you say was the activity that is them making themselves police?
Well, if you look at it, so there were people that stayed put in one location, but there were people like Ryan Balk and Kyle Rittenhouse. Ryan Balk was going around playing police officer, scaring people off when he heard somebody was invading another area. So it's not as if everybody was just huddling up within a shop and staying there. There were people that were out and about playing police officer.
So that's what you thought they were doing?
No, that's what they said they were doing in the trial.
When did they say they were being police officers?
Ryan, no, he didn't say they were being police. He was there acting as police. That's different.
He said the words, "I was acting as a policeman"?
No.
I don't think he said that, but we can go back and look at that another time.
I agree with you. He didn't say that. But my view is if he sees something happening, he is deputizing himself, and he is going in the place of the police to scare people off of a certain place with his rifle.
So you basically believe that he was trying to chase them off, and that makes him a policeman, not somebody who's protecting property?
No, I think what you're doing with my position is I'm stating what happened, and I don't think that that's something that's representative of somebody that's staying put protecting a specific property. If he's moving from point to point and he's protecting society, he's protecting multiple places in one place. In my view, he is playing police officer, and that's different.
Okay, so define what a police officer is.
So why are you asking me to define what a police officer is?
Because I want to be sure that we understand each other.
That police won't defend property.
Am I making that point?
Well,
I'm asking you. Okay, so no, what I'm asking you to do, because you are making a statement about you feel they were acting as police. So I'm asking you to define for me what you feel a police officer is, so that I can understand the parameters of that statement, because I think we have a disconnect on what I think policing is and what you think of policing is.
Well, defining policing to protect and serve, upholding the law, making sure people's rights are not infringed upon, as far as property being protected. If somebody's breaking into your house, the police will show up to make sure that you're safe and that the people that are breaking in the house are apprehended. Again, I can Google what policing means.
So did anybody in the Kenosha Guard apprehend anyone?
No, they scared people off. That's according to Ryan Balk. He said that he would run over with his gun and they would run off. I can't remember the exact words in the testimony, but it was in his testimony. Dominic Black, on the other hand, and I think it was the mate of Dominic Black, he stayed local. Ryan Balk and his mate were sort of roving.
Roving between two locations? Is that what you're talking about?
They were all
two
over.
car sources.
Because he said there was Ryan Balk in his testimony, and you might be able to correct me on this. Anybody in the chat can correct me on this. Ryan Balk in the testimony talked about showing up. There was a pickup truck that showed up with people he wasn't sure about. He told them to stay put at the gas station because he wasn't sure about their intent. He didn't feel good about them because they had hammers and they looked like a mob. And then he stayed and covered Kyle Rittenhouse, because I think he thought Kyle Rittenhouse was a bit young and green and he wanted to keep an eye out for him. and he filed and protected Kyle. And he was getting reports that somebody was breaking into a building, and then he would go over and he would sort that. And in his testimony, he said they would run off, and then he would come back to Kyle. And at one point in the night, he lost Kyle. But that would be the example I would be referring to.
Okay, well, I guess having watched ridiculous amounts of this footage to the point that I injured myself from sitting in my chair too much, I have not seen them do anything like that. I did watch them put out a fire, which is actually what started all of this.
Yeah.
And I guess, so my question then is that should they have not put out fires? Because even Binger wouldn't go with that, because it sounded pretty ridiculous. So what was the thing that you feel that they did that they shouldn't have done? Because I didn't see anybody issue any citations. Nobody was apprehended. They weren't arresting anybody. Chasing somebody away when you're defending property is fairly typical if you're defending against trespassing or, basically anybody doing something to property they shouldn't be.
I'm not comfortable with people who don't have any training or have any sort of mandate to show up in place of police. It's disruptive to the police and their actions as a standard. And I appreciate Kenosha wasn't operating as a high functioning police unit. But when you make, let's say we grant society permission to be able to allow allow people to rock up when they perceive that there's an issue. In Kenosha, I understand there was a clear issue with buildings being blown up, and it was going to happen, the next night as well. But the problem is, as a precedent, if you say this is okay in society, you then have groups that are either militias or independent people who can legally carry guns rocking up when they perceive the police aren't doing their job. I mean, Kevin Mathewson, when he wrote that statement, he was coming whether the police had got their shit together or not. So there wasn't even like a question of, maybe the police have kind of figured it out and they're going to sort it tonight. People were coming regardless with their guns. And that for me was a problem.
So when you say interfering, though, with the police's job, like somehow their presence made the cops' job harder, that kind of brings me back to the question I don't really feel you answered that I asked you earlier, that what is the citizen to do if the police are not acting, because they weren't, other than to kind of move the crowd around a little bit back and forth. They went up and down one street multiple times where the Bearcats pushed them back and then the Bearcats pushed them in another direction. They weren't actively arresting anybody. More people did get arrested. That's true. Not a lot of that was going on the night that Kyle was there.
No.
And so, but part of it is that police, I think they said that they like to have like a 10-to-1 ratio if they're going to start arresting people, and they weren't going to have a 10-to-1 ratio. And I had heard, it's been a while since I looked into this, but that they actually like turned down the National Guard, or that they were off. I think Kevin Glowicki actually said that they were off in like a holding pattern, but not doing anything.
The governor, I read something that Tony Evers, the governor, he was offered something like 1,000, and he only took 150 the first night. And that was, they weren't there. On all accounts, they weren't there. Really, they were very minimal support, almost non-existent. The second night after Kyle got in his incident, there was about 500 there. And then the night after, 1,000.
Well, where were they? Because they're not on any of the video.
Well, again, I don't know. Like I said, 150. It was fairly common knowledge that they were there, but they didn't get involved. So I don't know who was responsible or who was in charge. But
so then I guess my question that comes back to what we said originally. Okay, so you brought that up, that they were present as if that was like a relevant point, but you've just admitted that they weren't doing anything. So why is that relevant then? We could have a million, soldiers outside. If they're not doing anything, they're not contributing to the situation, which still leaves the citizen in the position where, well, what the hell am I supposed to do? I have to read this. I want to be clear. I don't intend to talk to you like this, but it's a super chat.
Nova's been hammering me all night. It doesn't matter if I make any statement that I bet if I sat down for a beer with Nova and we had just like a nice conversation, which he's brave because he's behind a keyboard, and if it makes him feel good, I'm happy for him to go nuts. It's whatever gets you going.
I'm just reading it because it's a super chat. I should have read the other ones earlier. It's kind of a
it's okay.
That you do that. Shawn has zero receipts for his outlandish claims. He's inventing excuses out of thin air. I'm
actually trying to give you specific sources. Right. Ryan Balk is what I was referring to when he made that comment. And go watch his testimony. I actually did a good job of relaying what he was saying because I found it notable. But when we're talking about the National Guard, I just made it as a comment. I didn't necessarily connect that to as whether people should or should not be going. I don't think any
I seem to
citizen.
recall that you said it under the inclination that meant that people shouldn't have showed up because they were National Guard present. That's what I seem to remember. I mean,
No, I didn't.
we can go
That
back
wasn't
and
my
look at it
perception.
later, but
No. But that wasn't my intention for that statement. If that's what you're asking.
does Shawn, I think he meant does, not see his logic of if they didn't dress sexy, they wouldn't get raped? Like, and I think I understand what he's trying to say, because there were a lot of people that, were saying that Kyle, basically was in that situation where we're like, well, if he wasn't there, then nobody would have attacked him. So that's why it's okay that people attacked him.
Now, he got attacked because he probably looked like he was the easiest. I agree. I think you had mentioned it was, what's his name? Huber was really going for death by cop. And I think the next best thing was death by one of the, the people that showed up, Kyle, looking like he was the weakest, was the easiest to attack. That would have been my view. That's my opinion anyway.
I think it would have probably been because of exactly what Rosenbaum told Ryan Balch and Kyle Rittenhouse is, if I catch one of you alone, you're dead.
Yeah. And he was spreading, he was, running off, offering medical and putting out fires, and he was cornered by Huber.
So according to Nathan DeBruin, they protected the courthouse and the police station. Then when the National Guard came, they protected the Dinosaur Museum.
Which I think was boarded up still today, isn't it? I think I read something about that.
I don't remember. I know that attacking the Dinosaur Museum was probably one of the most idiotic, stupid things that happened. I don't get what, systemic oppression they think that they're defeating by destroying a children's museum. In fact, there's video specifically of people of color calling them out for that. So I got to give them credit, like, hey, what are you doing? My kids come here. This is an educational facility for children. Why would you do this? So
I think let me qualify here, because I'm mixing up. I'm trying to give some comprehension that I know there was National Guard there that didn't do shit. That was, I guess, the main point here. There was police there that weren't doing shit. So I understand the need to, for people to feel like they need to take part. My view is, even with the situation being as shitty as it was, the only way that I would accept anybody showing up is if somebody, and if that's the case with CarSource, which is what I'm trying to link together. If that's the case with CarSource, or any business says, can you come and sit in my business with protected so nobody breaks in? That's one thing. My big issue is with how Kevin Mathewson called to arms people to come in and protect the community. And that's where that's more of a vigilante activity. That's more, working in place of the police. And even then, even in his comment, the thing that I really despised about the comment was he pretty much said, look, I'm demanding a chat with the sheriff of Kenosha, and we're coming, and we don't think, no matter how many law enforcement officers you have, it's going to make a difference. So we're coming, come hell or high water. I have a big issue with that.
Okay, so I want to kind of go back on the things I still don't feel I've gotten an answer to. The first of which is, what should citizens have done instead faced with that situation? I guess we'll start with that again. If you feel that they should not have done what they did, what should they have done instead?
Well, from what I understand, so what should they have done? If they're not police, they're not law enforcement, they don't have a mandate, stay home and be safe. That's the only thing I can say. That's not to say that we can't look at this as something that we accept. So because a bad night happens, or a bad few nights happen, that doesn't define how we should move, forward as society. We shouldn't depend on citizens to rock up when they feel like there's an issue. So whenever you make a decision as society, you can't necessarily say this was a bad day for the cops, therefore we now need to marshal ourselves whenever we feel they're not, cutting the mustard. There's implications when you start saying anybody who's allowed to have a gun show up when you feel there's a problem. That makes society more dangerous. That potentially puts, police in danger. That means that there's going to be more people on the other side of the coin that are bringing guns to engage as well. Because I don't think the presence of those militia people stopped rioters from rioting necessarily. They, just because somebody was there, they didn't go into the CarSource, even though that's out of business now. They went to another location, fine. But I don't think there's anything that a citizen should do in those outlier instances. We're not
just
talking
let them
about
burn the city down.
But that's a bit of a hyperbolic argument, though, isn't it?
No, because that's what they were doing.
So you think the entirety of Kenosha would be burned down if, let's say, it was to go on for 5 nights, every single building in
When
that
we say
district?
entirety, it's a question of like, are we talking about city line to city line? No, but their objective was to continue burning things. And that's actually
No,
what
I get that.
started the whole argument. Was they lit a dumpster on fire and started pushing it in the direction of a gas station, and then someone put that out with a fire extinguisher. The mob became enraged because someone put out a fire, and then ran up on, like, they were about to have a gang fight with the armed people who identified themselves as the libertarians.
Yeah.
And wanted to find the person who put the fire out, specifically saying where he at, why he do that. He ran like a bitch. So they were going to beat up someone for putting out a dumpster fire if they found him.
But are we not moving away from the point of what you were asking me about,
which
though?
is
'Cause that's not
specifically
quite...
like, what should they have done instead? Well, it's not really moving away from it, because I think we need to kind of grasp what motivates people to take action in this situation. You're suggesting that they weren't trying to destroy the rest of the city. I'm
I didn't
suggesting
say
that
that,
they
though.
absolutely were, and they were
No, I didn't say they
interrupted
were trying.
directly
No, I'm
by the
just...
people there.
So what I said was...
Real quick, because this is relevant,
Yeah,
and I
no.
want to, I will give Shawn this. He has come on V Radio's channel knowing he's going to get hell. Good on him. Not afraid of a little forceful resistance.
Thanks,
So there you go. Anyway, so go ahead and say what you were going to say.
So I think what you're saying is a bit hyperbolic, and what I'm saying is a little bit more simplistic than that. I don't believe, if let's say nobody showed up, none of the militia showed up, I think it's very difficult to make the argument that the entire city would have been burned down.
Would the entire city not have been?
Are you saying it's just... Let me just, so I understand this, because maybe there's one thing I'm misunderstanding. Do you think the militia being there, or should I not call it militia? Is that unfair?
Well, I don't know that I would call it militia. Part of the problem is there's a lot of constitutional argument about what is and is not a militia. Yeah. What I'm getting at is that they weren't operating from the perspective of, we are now activating the militia of this town. They were operating from the perspective of, Wisconsin law openly states that you may defend the property of yourself or a third person.
Yeah.
That's what they were operating under.
In that context, if, let's say, none of them showed up, well, there's two things here to say. One, the presence of militia, could that have enraged the situation? It's possible. You have to concede, because human behavior is challenging. It is possible that tempers were more enraged because of their presence. I would see that is a possibility. Do you see that as a possibility?
Having gone
I'm not asking
back,
you to say definitely. I'm just saying, is it a possibility?
Having gone back and watched specifically what happened, would tempers have been more enraged? The thing is the reason they were angry was because people were interfering with their arson. Like, that's what they were angry about.
That's one situation, though. So that's one
right,
item
but
in
that's
isolation.
what really kind of started the whole process. That's what pissed off Rosenbaum. I mean, he literally got up in the face of a guy with an AR-15 and, told other people later if he caught him alone, he would kill them, specifically because they put out a dumpster fire. That's literally what started all of this. Yeah. So, and that's why they were angry, is because people are interfering with that. It's like, I got a video specifically, for example, about what was taking place at the car source right before Kyle walked up, which is just them openly destroying more property. And then, with the plan to burn that place down as well, just like as they had the previous one. Whether or not it's the entire city down to the last square block, we could discuss that as to whether how much of it. But I guess to me, I kind of think that there isn't really an acceptable level of innocent people's lives to be destroyed by a mob that is angry on the behalf of a rapist criminal who got shot resisting arrest with a knife. I don't think there's really an acceptable amount of destruction of people's livelihoods or hurting innocent people on the behalf of a rapist who got shot while resisting arrest. That's where I kind of draw the line at, maybe they shouldn't have been destroying the property and hurting innocent people in the first place. Those are the people who should not have been there.
We agree. But it's I think if you're looking to, there's, with riots, it's moving people out and it's de-escalation. And I think if you have an angry group of people who feel like they're marginalized, and you're high-fiving the people coming in with guns and masks who clearly aren't police, who are white. You know, there is a possibility that could enrage people or bring people from external parts of the country to you know, with a chip on their shoulder. It is feasible that their presence could have exacerbated things. And I'm not even mentioning the fact that the only, you know, people got killed the night that the militia showed up. So it's not as if it's, for me, I spent a lot of time looking at the videos for day 3, day 4, I went on the Wayback Machine to find stuff that was taken off.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that I struggled to really sort of buy into is the militia made that much. Sorry, I'm not going to say that because that's not fair. You're right. It's not organized. So the people that showed up to protect the businesses made that much of a difference anyway. Because on the second night or the night after Kyle Rittenhouse shot somebody, I listened to a shit ton of interviews. And pretty much all of the news, if you watch all of the news agencies that did interviews, the local Kenosha news, everyone said they didn't see any militia there. They may have been there, but pretty much the protesters that were there the second night, everything after Kyle Rittenhouse was much more peaceful, and there was no reference of the militiamen there. The only reference I heard were a few news organizations who said, yeah, we didn't see any people with guns walking around. It's a much more peaceful night. So I don't even know
after the effect.
This was the night after Kyle Rittenhouse.
Well, yeah, after they've kind of gotten the message that maybe we should stop rioting and burning shit because people might actually be allowed to shoot us if we attack them for trying to prevent us from burning the city down. Yeah, that would
that's an assumption, though, isn't it?
I don't really think it's an assumption. That's just kind of a cause and effect. I think that the message was sent pretty clear that we would like you to stop burning the city down. And if you attack us while we're trying to put out the fires you're making, you might get shot. I think that I honestly feel that has a lot to do with what took the wind out of their sails.
But why don't you know, when there is armed militias at protests, there has been Black Lives Matter protests with people there protecting with guns. There has been rioting and damage. So are we saying that in Wisconsin, in this situation, we know that was the reason they didn't show up? It wasn't because there was a stronger presence of National Guard. There was more police there. Donald Trump made a big issue about it that night, pushing for more putting more pressure on the state. None of that had anything to do with it being safe for the next night.
Well, I don't really look too much at the next night because I don't think it's as relevant to when Kyle was there specifically. But I would say that, no, I would think that people would be reevaluating their perspective on things when there's pushback. It's one of the big problems I've had discussing with a lot of the people who've engaged in these riots and tried to justify it over the course of that year, was that they really honestly believe that the police are just too afraid to face them and that they're doing a really good job. Like, I've got literally comments from guys saying we are fighting the most militarized police force in history. Like, they literally believe that what they are doing is effective and that the cops are just too afraid to deal with them. So when somebody finally pushes back, that's when all of a sudden there's a problem. You know, it's that's, I think, honestly, the psychology of the situation is that then people get shot, specifically people that many of them knew, and then they got to reevaluate. Okay, well, this is different. Man, this is nowhere near as fun as shouting obscenities and cussing at cops who've been ordered not to do anything to us. Maybe we should reevaluate. And that's honestly, I think, one of the biggest problems. Like, many of the people who were kind of trying to organize, like there was a big black girl, for example, who seemed to be kind of in charge during the dumpster fire incident, you know, who seemed to try to be directing people as to what they should be doing. And they really resented the fact that there was a group of armed people there that weren't going to let them burn down the gas station. They weren't going to let them, you know, move their dumpster fire wherever they felt the need to take it. You know, she specifically went after them about that. And then people from that mob directly attacked, or tried anyway. They threw a cone and then they threw a flag at members of, you know, the group that identified themselves as the libertarians, you know, and the only thing they did was put out a fire. That was their motive. That's this whole tribal versus tribal argument is our tribe wants to destroy this. You are making that difficult. We would like you to go, and we will hurt you if you don't leave.
And I want to stress, I'm being very charitable as to the type of people that showed up in Kenosha as well to protect, because there's no way to know what their intention was on that night.
As far as the people who showed up to protect, or the people who
Yeah.
showed up to
So
destroy the place?
to protect as well. So we the whole process of this, we can say everything, only a couple bad people got killed, happy days, magic, and then everybody knew we meant business and went home. If I were to grant that, fine. Which I don't necessarily. I think it's difficult, in my opinion. I understand why you think that, but I think it's difficult to say with any certainty that 3 people were shot. Therefore, all of the bad people decided, nah, maybe not tomorrow night. I think there may be some people that thought that, but I don't think the rioters, the people, are that worried about that. I don't necessarily think I can equate, or I can find a causal relationship between the people that were there to protect and the safety on the next night. It's difficult to find a relation with that. And I think the reason I bring that up is we're talking about taking a shit ton of risk on in the way that these people were assembled. For what outcome? And that's where I'm trying to sort of square, well, what's the benefit of circumventing the Second Amendment, the Constitution, even the First Amendment rights of people that are there to protest. There's a lot that we have to consider compromising to make this behavior something that we say is an acceptable behavior all the time.
I think that I guess trying to come back to the basic premise here is that you feel that armed citizens should not have done anything. They should have just stayed at home and stayed safe.
Well, one thing I said, just to be clear, I said I would understand it if so, just because that's, again, the one thing and I need to make sure that I'm clear on this. It seems like sometimes you're taking my argument and then you're just sort of making it kind of, and I don't think you're doing it intentional. This is what I'm seeing. You're making it into a very generic piece that takes out some of the context.
Well, that's definitely not my intention.
No, I know it's not.
What part of the problem is that I tend to be really charitable and letting people talk for a long time. So as a consequence of that, that means that some of your nuance may be lost when I'm really just trying to make sure that you don't feel like I'm interrupting you. Like this is one of the reasons I don't usually debate on my own stream, because I don't like being, I mean, I'm good at it as compared to some people. I would say like Vosh would have already kicked you off here, and then shortly thereafterwards, he'd be, ad homing, insulting you for the next hour for his streamers.
And you know what? Not to use a terrible pun, but I'm bulletproof. I don't care. I really don't care what people think about my views. I'm trying to come at this with good intention.
Well, no, I understand. I have a certain ethic that I will hold to, whether I agree with you or not. I feel that debate is really important, and that people need to do so in good faith, and that everybody needs to be able to express themselves. So please feel free to clarify what your position was. Then I will respond directly, promptly, so that I'm not responding to 3 or 4 things you said.
Yeah, I think we're both doing that because there's a lot to unpack every time you and I go off on one.
Sure.
So let's look at what I said I would concede I would not like, but I'd be okay with, because it's legal. If the shop owner, a specific shop owner, had requested somebody to come and help them protect their lot, their business, that's their decision, that's their property, because they have insurance as well that could be marginalized if they have people protecting their building. I think partially that's why the people at the car source may have changed their story as to who they said could and could not protect their property.
Oh, we definitely agree on that. Those guys are lying their ass off now.
So, but there's reasons for that. That's very specific to them. And if it's their property, their business, it's effectively they're giving a mandate. So for me, it's all about who's mandating, and they have some level of understanding on who they're asking to come and what that specific motivation is. I'm not comfortable with that, but I'm okay with that. Like, that's what the law is fine. I agree with the law on that. The way people were marshaled to come out, the rallying cry that went on InfoWars is wrong. It is wrong. And that's where I draw the line. Outside of that, if you're a citizen and you don't know anybody who owns a shop and you're seeing your city burn down, call your representation. Call the governor. I know that the board, was it the commissioner of Kenosha was begging the governor to get involved, to get more National Guard called out, which they should have after the first night.
So, okay, you come back to just that you feel that perhaps, in your view, Kevin Matheson didn't handle it well. And it's unfortunate that Kevin Matheson is actually he's at an event right now, which is why he wasn't available to come on today. Because it'd be interesting to have you just talk to him directly about that. But
I would have no problem with it, because
I think what I would really it all kind of comes back down to the same thing that I was saying in the chat when you were talking with Paul, which is that it's not an ideal circumstance. So therefore, you're not going to get an ideal solution. There's no clean way to deal with this because
And mine's not
society
ideal
itself.
either.
What's that?
And mine's not ideal or clean either. I've not
Right.
said
Okay.
anything that's clean or
Right. And
ideal.
so as a consequence, though, there comes a point where when we talk about the Second Amendment, and I didn't really research that part of this as much, but I've been watching a lot of stuff, in early United States history lately, just out of my own interest, like particularly in the Wild West time period and such. When they were talking about the rights of citizens to defend themselves and their property, it's because of the fact that if the state of the United States, particularly in the colonial times, was you may not even be able to get a hold of a constable. You might literally be living on a
Mhm.
homestead that's like miles away from anyone when criminals show up at your door intent on taking your property or killing you. So the idea that we would just wait around for the state to get their shit together, I don't think that is in any way what was on the minds of the founding fathers when they wrote the Second Amendment. I don't think that they were thinking to themselves, yeah, well, we don't need them to do it, we'll do it. I think they kind of understood that it just wasn't practical to believe that the government was going to be able to protect everyone back then.
But that was what they believed specifically. And it's
That
if
you're
you look,
saying that they did believe that they could protect everybody?
so there's two things here to unpack. One, everybody had a gun at that point in time. I've been reading a shit ton of books on this over the last 2 months, just to try, because my thing is I want to understand, with everybody talking about the Second Amendment, I want to know what people were thinking when it was written. And when the Second Amendment was written, everybody had guns to protect their property. For hunting, there were tools as much as they were for local protection. And you said it, and you're correct. It was, people used them to protect their homesteads. But at the time the Constitution was written, there was no discussion about your individual right to bear arms. Bearing arms, like, everybody had guns already. Bearing arms was a militaristic action, something that you were called on by the state, by the governor, as a militia person to protect your country. And the idea with the right to bear arms was making sure that Congress and the federal government could not mandate a state to take away your guns. Because at that time, there was gun laws that are way more strict than they were now. In Philadelphia, Boston, I think there was one other, Philadelphia, Boston, and New Jersey, you weren't allowed to carry guns in the city. You weren't allowed to fire guns in the city. Guns were specifically for militia purposes and protecting yourself at home. So I think we've changed, and that's part of the Constitution, the amendments of the Bill of Rights. It's designed to evolve with us. Now, it's evolved in a way that's quite friendly to the quote Second Amendment crowd, because now the right to bear arms has changed in 2008. I think it's Supreme Court versus Heller or something. That was the first time in U.S. history that guns were defined as protecting yourself legally, where that Second Amendment was defined as your personal right to bear arms.
Well,
So
I would want to research further before we got into that, and it's not as important to what
hmm,
my issue here is. I will say that my view on it, having read what I have on it, and considering, like you said, everybody had firearms, and the reason why everybody had firearms is that, again, civilization as it existed at the time, you really were not in a position to be able to depend on the state to protect you. And they acknowledge the fact that, you will be in a situation where, inevitably these kinds of things will come about. And that's why the rights of, to own firearms shall not
hmm,
be infringed. But I still do not believe for a second that if a riot were taking place in colonial times, well, for one thing, they were a lot harsher about riots in those times.
yeah,
Shooting rioters was pretty common. That'll get them to quit real fast. Um, but it would also be that I just do not believe for a moment that Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, et al. Would be saying, just sit there while they burn the city down until we get everything straightened out. I just don't. That doesn't fathom. That
that's
doesn't
that's
work for
that's a
me.
bit of a straw man, though, because you're saying that because they didn't view the Second Amendment as a personal, mandate to make a decision when you police. That's not saying that they were okay with rioting. The usually at that time policing was done at village level, at local level, and also that's what the militia was. If they were mandated by the state to go and protect if there was a riot, they would go and do it. So the question in this case, in Kyle Rittenhouse, isn't about whether, in my view, people should be, just grabbing their guns and running for it, which didn't generally happen even at the time of the Second Amendment. It was the militia that would go and do that. It's more of a question of how ineffective the Kenosha police were, and how do we make changes so that that doesn't happen again? Because in my view, if you have random people rocking up to a politically charged event, that is not a solution that will ever work, and it's got implications. I think I remember messaging you about the Utah militia that I was reading about, and they started to attend all of the Black Lives Matter rallies. Now I know the chat's going to celebrate this, but a lot of people that went to protest didn't show up because the Utah militia were there at every one of those events, and that's a First Amendment issue. That is a core issue in the country when you have people that believe they're helping because of their political views without a mandate. So I'm a voter. I should have some say into whether I want them there or not. That's a problem. And I think we have to consider that application from Kenosha for the rest, any other situation. We can't just look at this as a one-off, say, gun owners, you can come in, but then after tonight, then it's back to normal. I don't think it works like that.
Well, I think my question would be, why would people believe that they can't show up to do their protest if they intend to lawfully and peacefully protest, because there's an armed group present of other people who are exercising their rights?
Because the people that are there aren't there because they're protecting the protesters. They're there because they want to intimidate. And I know that's not the case of all militia people. I've seen, people that are with quote militias that are genuinely there to protect. But there is when you have people with guns and you don't know what their background is because they don't have a mandate, natural selection would say smarter people would not go near those people because you have no idea what their intention or background is. Now, if you're part of the police or National Guard, there's some understanding that they've gone through a process that will keep you safe. But when I see a group of guys in fatigues looking like they're military when they're not, you can't make that assumption. So I understand why you would have groups that want to protest not protesting because they're concerned about their safety.
So I guess considering the fact that generally these groups, especially if they were doing what the Kenosha Guard did, all they did was put out fires, and the only person who got shot, well, the people who got shot attacked people and then got shot, and then only fired after one of them fired one of their firearms first. It comes back to trying to understand that I think that the biggest, but when you talk about people who are there to intimidate, do you feel that the rioters were there to intimidate?
Yes.
Because I would tend to believe that they were. Right.
Yes.
So then as citizens, if this is the problem that always seems to happen, is that there's no place. Now, you've said that you'd like to have seen the police act more, but you've already referred to, for example, the people in question as marginalized. Let's say that they did. Are you going to be okay with, them going ahead and deploying the National Guard, getting out the water cannons, the LRAD, which basically just makes everybody in a group of, in a place that is about the size of a football field, feel like they're on fire. Extensive, more use of pepper spray, tear gas, proactive use of batons. Like if you watch what it looks like when the cops break a riot in the 60s, it's not pleasant. Are you more comfortable with that, I guess?
Yeah. Well, so if you look at how around the world these sort of things, and it even happens in the US to a degree, it's why you see the Klan being able to protest or to rally. What we need to support is people's rights to protest, the ability to have a sanctioned protest so that the police know who and what and where they're protecting. Because you do have to protect the people that are there to have their voice heard. And if you run into a situation like in Kenosha where it's out of hand, and at that stage, you then have a mandate to send everybody home, including the protesters, because they are not safe because of the rioters. And if they're not going home, then at that stage, you need to protect the city, you need to protect the people. And at that stage, you start to usher everyone out, including the people that are there with guns to protect.
Well, I guess if we're already in the perspective that you feel that, because you mentioned earlier that you feel there was a justified anger on the part of the people that you refer to as marginalized.
I think you're being luxurious to a degree. So I'm
go ahead and clarify. What is it you think?
Everybody, so they believed they had, so I didn't say they had, I said they believed they had justification. Because keep in mind, I also said that that was not a cause that really backed that was not a protest that really backed their cause well. So they were there under false pretenses because they hadn't done the research on the specifics of the Jacob Blake case. And they believed they were there for good cause. That's what I said.
Okay, so they believe that. Well, I thought you kind of said that they had good cause, not that they believed it, but
well, anybody who wants to protest has, and that's the core, First Amendment right. The right, if you feel like you're marginalized, you have the right to have your voice heard. Now that's independent of whether they were right or wrong, that this was a situation they should have, or this was a good one to protest. So me making a statement that they felt this way is not me saying what I felt about their position.
Okay, so but we do agree that First Amendment protected rights to protest do not include systematically going business by business, burning it down.
We're talking about rioters and we're talking about protesters. Those are separate things.
So those are distinctly separate. Okay.
And that's what, and just to be clear, that's in the trial. If you went down to all of the reporters, all of the people that were there to protect, they distinguished that very thing in every testimony.
Okay. So what efforts, if any, were done on the part of the peaceful protesters to stop the violent rioters?
The only I don't know specifically outside of I saw people saying stop. That was about it.
Yeah, definitely not enough. And then for some reason in the dialogue after the fact, it's always that, innocent peaceful protesters were shot, even though that's an obvious lack of reality.
We haven't said that here tonight.
No, but it's common. That's something I was saying when we were framing what we said earlier. But it's just that's one of the reasons that I do this, is that there's still so many false ideas about what was taking place.
Can I do sorry, go ahead. I don't mean to speak over you. Apologies.
No, it's fine. So I guess where we're coming from now is that you feel that, okay, so we got to rewind a little bit. So you're saying that you would have supported what would have had to have been it would have been very violent. A lot more people would have been hurt to stop that riot. And I'm not saying that shooting a few people is somehow better than that. That's not the comparison. But I guess it's kind of a hindsight is always 2020. Any time that the police acted even a little bit against the riots of 2020, it was always all over the news and blown up. And that's why they tend to think they're in a no-win situation, as far as their motivation about dealing with rioters. But in this instance, we come back to what was actually happening, which was the government wasn't doing anything. The police were not really doing anything effective. So that leaves the citizens to decide what they want to do. And that had already been going on for a couple of days prior. In what motivates Kevin at that point, and again, I wish he could just speak for himself, is, okay, so it's pretty clear to me that the state is not going to do its part here. We're going to need to do something on our own, which is, again, not ideal. You talk about the importance of training and all that. I tend to agree. That's why I think abolishing the police is kind of silly, right? But the average citizen at that point has to make a decision. Are we going to stand up and defend our community? I tend to believe that is the unfortunate, appropriate reaction if you have no other course, and they didn't. I don't think, for example, calling up the governor would have done a whole lot for the people of Kenosha. I think it would have done so maybe after the fact or something. But if the governor actually wanted that riot stopped, there's a lot more that they could have done too. And they don't. And I think a large part of that, it's kind of a side note, but I think the biggest thing is they loved showing pictures of burning cities and saying Trump's America. There was a large point of the question of whether or not they feel that the riots were in some way going to help them in the upcoming presidential election. But regardless, the real framing of what was actually taking place is the state was not in any way doing their part, and that left people to react in the way that they could with what they had. Again, not ideal, but I cannot blame them. And when you look at what the motivation of the crowd was, what specifically brought them into conflict with those people, you could say, well, okay, well, people showed up with guns and that's what caused the problem. I don't agree with that. I think the problem was people systematically destroying property that was not theirs at the behest of somebody who certainly did not deserve any form of protest in his name, and nobody was going to stop it. That's where we're going to have a disconnect. I just, again, like I said, in ideal world, I guess we could just go downright, especially when they're constantly accusing the government of being fascist anyway. Just go straight up fascist. Get in the streets and beat those protesters down, because that's what would have been necessary. And the other thing you got to remember when they're making this equation, and I showed you the videos of like guys with AR-15 shooting at Bearcats. There's all kinds of guys with pistols. It's an armed mob. It's going to get bloody, if you try to put that mob down. A lot more people, I guess when I look at it, a lot more people are going to die, in my view. That's all a woulda, woulda, coulda, shoulda. I feel that in the situation as it existed, I don't feel that you've given me an answer that I am satisfied with, and I don't think anybody else would be satisfied. That, oh, okay, well, because there's no police, I just better hunker down in my own house and not do anything. I don't feel that that's an appropriate response, and I can understand why the people who did what they did. And I've talked to some of them. Obviously, I've talked to Grambo a lot. She's a good friend. I talked to Nathan DeBruin, who was actually just like viewing the thing as a neutral third party, and he tended to agree. He's like, what the hell are these people doing? This isn't helping anything. And that kind of comes back to like the blasé attitude about riots that has gone on in the perspective of the left, that they haven't done enough on their end to prevent these things. So, but anyway, is there anything you would want to add then, I guess, to this perspective that you feel that people should just hunker down and stay safe? And because like it seems to me like everybody's views on this always seems to make it easier on the rioter and not on the people who will inevitably be victimized by them.
So in saying that making it easier on the rioter, I think when you look at any situation where there's been atrocities, where police are never going to be, anytime you have people organizing, law enforcement, it's very difficult, especially I think in Kenosha. The way I would quantify what happened was it was a place that this was not expected to happen, and the police were not prepared for this type of thing, and the reaction was not good enough. And if you have 20, 30, I mean, how many individuals showed up to protect property anyway?
I don't have the solid number.
I thought it was like
it looked like about a dozen,
like
maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe Anne could answer that a little better than me since she was present and among them. But
what I kind of have to accept, because I'm looking at this through the lens of perspective, precedence. And if we're talking about what is and is not acceptable, sorry, my butt was falling asleep.
Well, I have a smashed tailbone, so I get it.
Sorry, I guess my problem isn't nearly as bad. I think the way we need to look at this, I think it's very wrong to look at this situation in isolation, because every decision, if you're saying that you support that action, so your view isn't surely then that the government will continue to tell people with weapons to stay home so they can do their job, which is I think we would agree is what the police would say, right?
Right, but you do also agree they weren't doing it, right?
Yeah, no. I'm talking about what would be the right thing for the police to say. If let's say, so reading the call to arms from Scott Matheson, or Scott, I keep getting his name wrong.
Kevin Matheson.
So we're mobilizing tonight and have 3,000 RSVPs. Our effort is made the national media. I ask that you do not have your officers, blah, blah, blah. We're willing to talk to KPD, open discussions. It's evident no matter how many officers, deputies, and other law enforcement officers that are here, you will still be outnumbered. So what would your response be to that as the sheriff or the governor or the mayor? Would you say, you know what, we're not really doing it. Let's get these guys in? Because I don't think that would be what would be the correct response, right?
The correct response would be okay, given basically what you're reading, because I haven't read that. Because I focus more on what happened specifically to Kyle.
That went out. Yeah, that
was
the call to
arms by Kevin Matheson.
Yeah.
He said that he knows that you'll be outnumbered regardless, and they were. And he wants citizens to get together and work together, collectively, basically network for the purposes of defending the city. That seems to be what I get out of it. Real quick, super chat. What's the solution to stopping, deterring, and preventing riots? I have yet to see one offered, and any effective plan in action to resolve the issue. Let me answer this real quick. Well, back in the days of Occupy, because most of our stuff did not ever devolve into violence, it has to be policed by the activists themselves very diligently. And they have to be careful that their messaging to everyone openly condemns that kind of behavior, which is what we did. And we had ongoing protests all over the country that literally just went on for, because it was camps, like for, hours, weeks, months at a time. But it has to be the culture of your protest movement for that to be the case. And that is no longer the culture anymore, not like it used to be. And in fact, unfortunately, there are organizers who just openly feel that riots are the only way to get anything done. Like they obviously haven't read the science about it. So it really has to happen at that level. And that's why I say that it bothers me that they're not taking responsibility for their part in it. And instead, the only part of the wrongdoing, as far as they're concerned, is what happens when one of their rioters gets hurt while rioting or killed while attacking someone. That's when their heckles get up. That's when they feel they need to come out and make long videos about it or whatever. Only then are they interested. So anyway, as far as my views on like what would we do, like I'm disabled now, but I could say that, well,
If you're the
especially my,
governor, is what
what's
I'm
that? Oh,
asking.
if I'm
Sorry.
the governor,
Yes.
if you're the governor and you don't want this to happen, then you need to go out and actually mobilize and do something about it. If you
Okay.
don't want citizens to do it themselves, which inevitably they're going to do. And I can't blame them, but I honestly feel, because there was a strong feeling, because there was a different attitude about the responses. Well, you also notice typically these riots tended to happen in Democrat controlled cities. I don't think that that's an accident. And I think a large part of the reason for that is again, the Democratic Party seemed to think that these riots were beneficial to them in the upcoming elections. I know that when Donald Trump felt that people were not reacting well enough, for example, for the situation in Portland, he sent federal officers out there, and people got upset because people all of a sudden actually started getting arrested and actually started getting charged with federal crimes. And then they get treated like, you see, he sent his stormtroopers. That's one of the biggest problems with all this, is that everything had a political framing. If your objective is to actually end the riot, I first would do your best to try to prevent it from the beginning with public relations. But this one was so nasty that they literally threw a brick at a cop and knocked him out like a couple hours after Jacob Blake got shot or something like that. Um, and then afterwards, you can't let it get out of control. They basically let a culture that believed that they were free reign to do whatever they wanted in that city to take hold. That's why I said, I bring up the video of what was literally happening at the car source before Kyle showed up, because there was a citizen who was out filming it. They were destroying cars, they were lighting things on fire, and it was their intention to burn the place down. So so you're left in that situation of, well, I can go ahead and do the draconian thing and get this done, but when we're in this weird society where we've decided that all police action is always wrong, and more to the point where it seems almost as if like they want to have a right to resist arrest to the fullest of their ability, and that cops have to bend over backwards to keep them safe while they're resisting arrest. you know that's where we run into a problem where the ideal circumstances don't exist, because the society has become unhinged, because the people who are in charge of activism, who should be taking more responsibility for the point of view of the people that they're trying to influence, I honestly don't think they're trying to prevent violence. So, we could do the draconian thing, because yeah, that'd stop the riot. Or they could do what they're doing, which is hope that the rioters will just eventually be finished. The problem is that the common citizen is not included in that. Like, they're not going to replace the property of the people who destroyed this stuff. The city's not going to pay for that. Like for example, the Mexican family whose ice cream and taco parlor got destroyed. They're not going to get their money back. Unless people decide to do a GoFundMe for them, they're not getting anything. And I don't trust the car source people anymore, but for obvious reasons. But I don't think he's going to get any of his money back either. If anything, they're probably ruined forever.
I
So
think they've opened up new businesses in Illinois. They've got quite a big car dealership,
well, if
set of
they
car
did,
dealerships.
that's good. But I don't think the city's going to show up and help any of these people with the destruction that happened due to their negligence.
So
And that's what goes on in the minds of these people, because for the most part, nobody's responsible for that other than the people who did it. And well, good luck trying to find the specific people who burned your business down.
So that doesn't quite answer my question though, because if we agree, so let's say I was to agree that, you know what, the situation's so fucked that we just need to get any person with a gun to rock up and hope that they know what they're doing. And fingers crossed they aren't, it's not going to make it harder for the police. When you get a statement like that from the quote Kenosha Militia, so I'm only saying that because that was sort of the call to arms that really motivated a lot of people to rock up. How do you address that? Because they're saying they're coming come hell or high water. Let's say that you've been told there's going to be more support that somebody else, whatever the case may be. How do you, as somebody who's the sheriff or the governor, respond to that? You can't acknowledge that, because if you acknowledge that, which is kind of what you're saying, then you're pretty much preventing the police from successfully doing their job. I think it makes it difficult for them to tell people to leave when you're inviting people to come in. I don't understand how you would litigate for that.
I guess I don't understand why I'm being pushed with this question, because I don't think it's relevant to what we're specifically debating here.
If we're making a decision, would you agree that if we were to agree that is the correct action, then we're making that decision for society in a way? We're saying that this is the correct behavior. When things get out of hand, the citizens need to make not a voter's decision. They have to guess that there's a majority that want me to get involved. They then have to mobilize themselves. Now, we understand that the police don't want that. But when there's a situation where we've agreed that this can happen, how's law enforcement meant to deal with that? With having a shit ton of, armed people who want to just jump in at a moment's notice and take over. How do you try to fix a riot when there's more problems coming in?
See, I don't agree with your characterization of what was taking place. It's like you're kind of in a what if of like, so what if the police finally did decide to go ahead and do something? What if the politicians in the question did finally decide to do something? Because the people were there as a consequence of nothing being done. That's why they were there. So, it's not as if the police said, well, we were going to do something, but we decided not to because there were armed civilians present and we just didn't want to deal with that. That never happened. Like, what did happen is that nobody did anything. A lot of businesses were destroyed and people were hurt. That's what did happen. And it happened because the government wasn't doing anything. And citizens finally had to get together, say, we've had enough of this, and, try to stop it. That's what did happen. As far as that, like, I guess that's really how I would answer it, is that it seems like your question is kind of like out of the bounds of like what we're
No, not
discussing.
at all. Because if you're making a decision on how society should operate, you then have to take ownership for what that means moving forward. And if the correct decision of the police is to tell the people with the weapons to not show up and let us do our jobs, not just in this situation, every situation moving forward, we can't at the same time then say, well, if they think it's not going well, they should show up and do something about it. Because that does impact the ability for law enforcement to do their jobs. Does it not? Or is that where I'm getting something wrong?
No, I don't agree with that. Because armed citizens have, stood beside police before. It would be a question at that point of like, whose authority are they going to recognize? And I would believe that any of the people in the Kenosha Guard would have just done whatever they were told. They did obey police commands throughout the night.
No, they didn't. They didn't go home when they were told.
Nah, no, the cops rolled right up on them and told them, we appreciate what you're doing. They didn't tell
Which
them
was
to leave.
wrong. Very wrong.
Okay, well, we can disagree about that.
Disagree
they
with
were
that.
being told not to do anything
So
about
there
it.
was a curfew and they were out after curfew. So by just that alone, they weren't listening to the rules. They were telling people to go home. And if the cops were being equitable, that everybody needed to leave when they were doing their pass-throughs, that should have included the people who were there with guns. Go home. Everybody go home. If you're making,
I think if we're talking about equitable, the first priority should have been the people that were trying to destroy the city. Those would be the people who should have gone home first. If we're
so
going to talk
how did
about
the
that.
cops know the difference between the protesters and the people who were there to protect?
Well, there were some people that were actively committing crimes and some people who were not.
So anybody who wasn't committing a crime was definitely militia.
I didn't say that.
No,
but I
that's what I'm
said that,
asking.
okay, well, no, I didn't say that.
But this is the problem. If you're police and you accept the help of citizens who haven't been really vetted, you don't know how good they are with a gun or how good their communication skills are, because in a riot, in that situation, you've got to be fucking good to be able to either what's the word, de-escalate, or you've got to be smart enough strategically to know where you can stand safely to also protect the building. So we're kind of hoping that the right combination of people are there who have a very high level of understanding in how to deal with the situation are there. But then because they're not able to differentiate themselves in any specific uniform, because you can't come as a militia, how then are the police going to deal with people with guns who are there for bad intent and people who are there with guns with good intent if we're inviting these people in?
Well, what I would say is that my assessment would have been from the people who were present that if the police actually did show up and start breaking up the riot, those people likely would have went home.
I agree.
But that didn't happen. And I'm referring to the people in what we're referring to as the militia, the libertarians, the whatever. You say that it's not ideal because you have no idea who's going to show up. Well, yeah, I get that. I would say that it's not ideal to say, hey, we're going to have a protest here, because they don't know who's going to show up either. Okay, but that's what they do. And unfortunately, you get a random sampling of who showed up, and they just all happen to be felons. So that's unfortunate. Do you feel that protesters should do any more vetting about who they openly call to show up in a city? Do you think they should be any more cognitive of that?
But do you think there's a difference between people that are showing up to protest versus people that are showing up with rifles to defend? Because I think there's a bit of a false equivalence there.
No, I don't think it is, because unfortunately, very little, if anything, was done on the part of the people who called for the citizens to show up because we're going to make a ruckus because this rapist got shot. They don't have any responsibility for some reason for people who show up who might become bad actors. But you're suggesting that if there were any bad actors among the Kenosha Guard, that the Kenosha Guard should feel responsible for that.
Repeat that again. I didn't quite follow that.
Okay. You're suggesting that Black Lives Matter, who is the reason, because they did their own call to arms, so to speak, of we're all going to show up here and we're going to protest because Jacob Blake got shot. Okay. Yeah. They did an open call. They certainly didn't vet anybody. Okay. People came from all over the country. We're all worried about cross state lines until it's a rioter from Oregon. Okay. And I didn't say you said that, just so we're clear. I hope we don't have to discuss. I hope we don't have to say that you have a big problem with cross state lines, because that's a separate ridiculous.
Cross state lines. He came across state lines. We all know that. It's fine.
Along with like everybody, like a large number of people who were present. So anyway, so Black Lives Matter openly says we're having a protest. Hey, everybody show up. They don't vet to see who's going to show up. They don't have any responsibility for it after that. They certainly didn't do anything to try to get everybody to go home when things go badly. They don't apologize for. They don't openly condemn the behavior when people do start burning down the city. So I guess the question would be, if Black Lives Matter is not responsible when bad actors show up to destroy buildings and hurt people in Kenosha, why would you hold the Kenosha Guard to a different, standard? Because yes, bad actors might show up in the Kenosha Guard. Do you understand where I'm going with this now?
Yeah, I think the Kenosha Guard would hold themselves to a better standard than protesters.
And I would think they did too. Like that.
But it's not. We're talking about. We need to, if we're going to agree. Let's say you and I are trying to come up with laws and rules. Constitutionally supported in how people, how society moves forward. And we accept that this action, with people, the call to arms and people coming to help based on their perspective. And that's what it was. No matter how bad it was in Kenosha, it was still their opinion that this was the time to act. How do we govern for that moving forward? And this isn't about like,
moving forward past the night in question.
Well, because this sets a precedent. If we were to say that this is an acceptable piece of behavior and well on them, citizens acted, guns win the day, yay, yay. Then moving forward, how do we know that that is going to be, that's the whole purpose of why police have a mandate. So now police are in a position where they now not only have to consider protecting protesters, watching out for rioters, they need to then be able to discern the random people that show up with good intent. And it's something you have to, you can't just say it was fine and we're okay with it and it means nothing moving forward. That statement has impact moving forward and how people behave who aren't police, who are people with guns who want to do well.
So let me understand, just so I understand what we're framing here, because at this point, you're talking about moving forward. Are you talking about from now on, and we're not discussing that night in Kenosha anymore?
It's part of my opinion now has to do with precedent. So I'm consistent in Kenosha and I'm consistent after Kenosha, because I don't think we know hindsight is 2020 that the Kenosha police didn't do shit the night Kyle Rittenhouse was attacked.
Right.
We know that. Kevin Mathewson didn't know that they weren't going to get their shit together that night. And he called random people to come and do shit. And even if he had met with the sheriff, he said in his statement, I don't care let me get the exact words. We are looking to talk to KPD and open a discussion. It is evident that no matter how many officers, deputies, and other law enforcement officers are here, you will still be outnumbered. That is pretty much putting the police in an inoperable position, even if they had been resourced that day, whatever. So that has impact. So if we're saying that is acceptable behavior, that is going to have an impact in how police do their job successfully, if we say that's okay.
So in the future, not now, not in that moment.
But you don't think the decisions, what we find or deem acceptable now, has an impact into how people behave moving forward?
Well, I'm not saying that we don't. I just think that that's a different conversation. I'm not opposed to talking to you about it, but it's.
But do you think
now you're talking about, well, what should we do in the future? Well,
so,
here's what I would say: is precedent was already set that in the event that the state is, whether by negligence or inability, capable of protecting you when an angry mob shows up and starts destroying your community, that you have a right to defend yourself. That's written in Wisconsin law. I would agree with it. In an ideal circumstance, it wouldn't be necessary. But if the police are going to do their jobs, which is what they're actually doing most of the time when these situations go on, which is what they were doing when they shot Jacob Blake. Okay. If the police are going to be allowed to do their jobs, then you wouldn't have this situation in the first place. Then you don't have to worry about what citizens would do. What citizens are doing in this situation happens after the system is broken down. In this instance, in my view, for political reasons, and which is terrible in my opinion. But this is a question you're only going to have to answer if you're going to be in a situation where in the future, going forward, if there's a riot and police are, end up inevitably having to get violent to get people to leave who don't want to leave, that you're going to be accepting of what comes after that, which especially if the rioters are armed with pistols, especially if the rioters are armed with AR-15s, you're basically kind of putting it in a situation where I have a funny feeling that, especially if you're in any way left-leaning or pushing the perspective of the police are bad narrative, it's not going to go well. That's the thing. It's always weird is that I don't understand is like people, okay, so if we did the thing, what you're talking about, especially when they're armed, well, now if you got AR-15s and you're shooting at Bearcats, which happened, police are going to be shooting at those people. That's what's going to happen next. Then more people are going to get shot. And again, I get it. That's an ugly business. I just find it dubious because I don't think that's actually how it would have been received by people who are speaking from your perspective, if that's what actually happened. If the cops actually came down on them, because again, literally shot at a Bearcat with an AR-15. Absolute morons. That was taking place the night before. Okay. And there were armed people, as I already mentioned earlier, like the guy who racked his pistol like he thought he was Ice Cube and Poison the Hood in response to them putting out a dumpster fire. I'm sure he felt like a real man. That's the environment that they're in. As far as precedent, the precedent will still continue to be that citizens have the right to defend themselves and their property, and the property of third persons if necessary, and the person of third persons if necessary. It shouldn't be necessary. Ideally, it won't be, but that's the precedent I think was already set. that's the understanding that I have of it, and that's what I support. I think that instead, the suggestion that, well, we only allow the state to do this, and if for some reason the state is not doing this, that's just too bad. We don't want anybody to get hurt, so let's let the rioters do their rioting thing. I can't agree with that.
And that's not what I said, but
okay.
I get why you said that, because I never said at any point let the rioters riot. And I think there's a piece of nuance here, that when we're talking about police not doing their job or not doing their job, or sorry, not protecting the people, I think to say that I think the rioters should just run their course and they should do their thing, then no, that's not correct.
So then what do you think?
Well, I think the police need to do their job to protect. I think the National Guard in that instance should have been there to barricade or protect the buildings.
And you would stand by that even after people inevitably got shot in that situation.
So people got shot by the people that, well, was Kyle was the only one that shot anyone.
Right, but we're going into your theoretical scenario of the state responding to a crowd that has assault weapons and pistols that fired at police vehicles. They already attacked police openly the night before, like right after the night of Jacob Blake's shooting. That's the crowd you're talking about going after.
We're specifically talking about, because I did differentiate the quote, the people that showed up on their own accord versus the people that would have been asked to be there.
Okay, so it's hard to follow, because now I guess what you're suggesting is, okay, so now we're going back to the confines of only Kenosha and the actions of Kyle Rittenhouse, and that night. Is that where we're back to now?
Well, we've specifically been talking about that. Are you? I think I might have gotten lost then in what you were saying. I thought you were referring to.
Well, no. Earlier on, you talked about precedent. You talked about going forward, and then you brought up like hypotheticals about whether or not, like, what if I was the governor, or what should we do in the future, or I feel the police should have acted, and as I pointed out to you when you said, well, the only person who shot anyone was Kyle Rittenhouse. If the police had responded to that situation in the way that would have been necessary, when your armed mob includes people with assault weapons and pistols, people are going to get shot. And that was before the Kenosha Guard even showed up.
So we're dealing in hypotheticals then, that the police would have shot people if they had gotten involved, but the people that were there who weren't the police to protect would not have gotten shot.
I guess okay. So
you see,
I'm trying to bring us back to
no. But I'm talking
here
about that night, because I think what you're alluding to is, had the police been more involved, it would have been more deadly. Therefore, that's sort of contrary to everything I'm talking about.
Okay, well, I do believe that if the police did get involved to stop a mob that was armed the way that they were, yeah, I do feel more people would have died.
And
now,
with
the clarification that doesn't mean I think it is better for citizens to take it upon themselves to do it. I think the citizens in the situation were there because that wasn't happening, because the police weren't doing anything.
Yeah.
And when a citizen is left in that situation, they don't have any choice other than just let criminals do what criminals do. And you said that you don't support that, but we still don't really have a suggestion that's going to stop the riot. So if the state's not going to stop it, and in this instance they're not, what do citizens do? And I think that's actually a good, let me ask you Tam's question real quick. Question for Shawn: if people were attacking his home or business and police would not show up, would you call your friends for help, or would you just let them burn it down?
So Tam, would Tam be happy for me to remove home, because that's not relative to what we're talking about?
It is for some of the people that were present.
So home, I mean, we know that people, if somebody's attacking your home, of course you want to call the police or have somebody there to protect your home. We're talking about if somebody's, and I said this a few times, if somebody who owns the house or owns the business is asking you to come and help protect, or you are using a weapon to protect, I'm fine with that.
Okay, so if you were, let's try to frame it differently. If you were a citizen of Kenosha and you were in the situation where your business was destroyed and you don't have any guarantee of any monetary, recompense from anybody to get it back, are you also kind of suggesting that if the police wouldn't have responded, that you wouldn't do anything in that situation?
Yeah, I wouldn't.
So you would just okay. So that kind of brings us back to that there doesn't seem to be a solution then to stop the riot.
So would we agree the solution to stopping violence and rioting isn't to give the citizens an open mandate to make a judgment call on when it's a problem?
Would I say that's not the solution?
Yeah.
I would say that's not the ideal solution, but if the state is not doing its job as part of the social contract, the citizen is left with no choice.
Okay. And then let's say, I mean, that's a hypothetical, correct? We're going down hypotheticals?
I guess it seems to be going back and forth.
Yeah, a little bit. Because I think there's a lot of nuance here that if let's say we're accepting that as a society, we're accepting what happened in Kenosha was the right call. You know, it's you can't. I don't think you can just say in Kenosha that worked out. Therefore, we need to work this into sort of Plan D for every other instance this happens.
Okay, well, so you haven't really provided though that what the alternative is if the state is breaking down. Real quick, let me get this super chat. Please keep doing your thing, V. You're great. I really enjoy this. Thank you, Germs.
Thanks, Germs. Thank you so much. I'm so glad I got a supporter finally. Thank Christ.
He was talking to me, but that's
no. He was talking to me. Clearly talking to me. No, I know. Of course, I'm being.
So, what is the citizen supposed to do if the state doesn't act?
So you're going down the road of saying, you know what, the Kenosha police, the government are pretty much going to do, and it's a fair assessment, same as I'll make an assessment of my own. They are going to do nothing to change their tactics or resourcing or do anything to improve preventing this moving forward, which isn't necessarily consistent with how we've moved forward, you know, societally. We have made changes to structures and things to make things safer, aside from guns. And I think in that situation, I don't think we would assume that nothing would happen just because we haven't agreed to arm citizens.
Okay, I guess that I don't really feel that's a very concise answer to my question that I've been answering.
So do you want me to give the exact strategy that the police and the government need to take up to ensure that people can safely protest and riots don't burn down Kenosha? Is that what you need me to say?
No, we've already discussed that what the state would do. I voiced that I have a concern that I am skeptical that, because I get this from a lot of people who are very anti-police, that they think the police should have done something. Even Kevin Glowicki said that. But I'm also sure that Kevin Glowicki would have been sitting there with his camera recording any instance where a rioter might have been hit over the head with a club because they wouldn't leave, you know, which is inevitably what happens when they're cleaning up a riot. But that's a side note. What do citizens do if the state, for whatever reason, whether they can't or they won't, what is the citizen to do when the state will not, because it either can't or won't do anything in a situation like Kenosha where businesses are being destroyed, people are being hurt? What does the citizen do there? I agree with you. The state totally dropped the ball. I think conservatives have been screaming, we need to stop these goddamn riots for quite some time, and they get demonized for doing that. Okay. And then the rioters, no matter what they did, if they get hurt, somehow are always martyrs. So I guess let me just clarify. Let's bring it back to just this one clear thing, because I don't think we're really getting it. What is the citizen to do at that point? And you said it's not to just let the riot happen. Okay. But if the state is failing in its place of of the whole social paradigm, the social contract between us and the state, that's what was happening, then what? What does the citizen do?
Well, anything you would do in society to make change. People run for office, people protest. People protest if things aren't changing.
I gotta stop.
I want to say protest peacefully.
As the thing is going on, I will make the decision to run for office.
No, I think if you don't have
a mandate, as it's going on.
No, I was very clear. You do fuck all. You don't get involved. That's my view, and people don't like it. It's messy. You know, we have people in place, and when we talk about the police and the state, even if we go back to the Constitution, that's not considered big government. You know, the state was meant to be the free to make laws and rules without being encumbered by the federal government, and the police are accountable for their decisions. They're accountable now for what they did in Kenosha. And they're going to, if something's going on the night, I'm not happy with personally somebody just watching TV saying, that's a lot of fire, I'm going to get my gun and go out there, without understanding what impact that may have to law enforcement and trying to actually solve the problem.
I still don't really feel that's a reaction
You
to what
don't,
I
it's okay.
asked
You
you.
don't agree with that, and that's fine. We don't have
Okay.
to agree on that. But I don't believe it is right, or it is the best outcome for people to, you know, make it upon, just make the decision on their own to just rock up with a rifle and just, try to protect the city. I don't believe that is the right answer. I believe that if in all cases that is going to not make things better. And people will, I don't care, that's just my opinion. That is my opinion, and that may be the hill that I die on, and that may be where we differentiate. But I don't see any situation where it's okay to give citizens that level of freedom to get in the way of police from doing their job, even when they're not doing their job. You still have situations where people have to make that judgment call when maybe it's not as bad as they think it is, but they see one fire on TV, they get a piece of fake news, which you're familiar with from the media, and that motivates them to act and to get involved in a situation where they're making things worse.
Well, there was plenty of real news in the situation, and I think my understanding of it, being from the people who were present, that was shortly after the shooting, things calmed down and people got a lot less bold.
But
Um,
you cannot, there's no way that you can't draw any definitive conclusions. You can postulate that was there, but there was a shit ton of factors in place. You have to.
well, I will say this as a counterpoint to that is that, well, we can certainly postulate that when nobody was doing anything, that they were pretty emboldened just to continue to doing what they were doing, which was destroying things and hurting people.
But again, you're removing all the other factors that would have changed from one night to the other.
What factors?
So, or let me, maybe this is where I'm getting it wrong. As far as the second night, did the protesters, were they aware, or did they have any concern, or did they see any people with guns? I think we both agreed there wasn't anybody there to protect. Did the government increase there, as far as the I think Donald Trump sent or mandated that there was going to be National Guard. I think there was a substantial increase in National Guard presence on that night, and I think the police did change their tactics and were more active that night. But we're then saying that none of that had any part to play.
I think that if anything, ironically, if there was a reason or a motivation on the part of the state to become more involved than they already were, it probably would be because of the shit show that unfolded when they didn't do their jobs. Because then eventually it started looking bad on the city and the pro police protest people at that point because
Yeah,
they let it get out of hand. But
whatever the reason.
do I think that they would have done that otherwise? I honestly, as unfortunate as it is, I think the shooting was the catalyst that slowed everything down. You could disagree with that. I would say that the data would indicate, and not just the data, but like watching the video of the crowd in question for many, many, many hours, their intent was just to continue doing what they had been doing for the 2 nights before. And they did continue to do it. And then a shooting happened, and all of a sudden everybody went, well, shit, I guess somebody is going to stop us when we're doing this. Super chat from Rage Pro. Stop letting him frame this as protecting the city. The arms are to protect themselves. Kyle protected the city with a fire extinguisher.
I think that's fair. No, I think that's fair. I will happily say, because I know that Dominic Black, Kyle Rittenhouse, Ryan Balk in their testimony, I think Ryan's mate in all of their testimony said they wouldn't even shoot a protester if they were vandalizing a building. It was just to protect themselves.
Right. Johnny Walker Dread says on the third night, rioters were free to burn or whatever they wanted. The guards stopped them. And I would agree. When the part that I don't share was that everything was because it wasn't as relevant specifically to Kyle, but like the video leading up to the dumpster fire argument was the BLM protesters started throwing objects at the Bearcat, and the libertarian group that was standing at the gas station said, "Hey, don't do that." And that was when the tension started. Was because citizens were saying, "Hey, don't be violent with the cops. Just chill out, be peaceful." And that group didn't like that very much. So then they lit a fire in a dumpster and started pushing it in the direction of a gas station, to which the citizens in the situation responded by putting out the fire with a fire extinguisher, to which the mob responded by trying to find the person who did that so that they could beat them up. That's the energy of the night leading up to everything else, and that's also what triggered Rosenbaum. I guess he felt that dumpster fire was an important part of his legacy as a person, and that he really felt robbed of that when that guy put that out. But anyway, so that's the energy leading into it. Those are the kinds of people we're dealing with. That's what their motivations were. If you don't feel that the shooting in any way, slowed anything down so far as the activities on the evening, I guess that's something we'll have to agree to disagree on.
I don't know. I
I'm
don't
sorry?
know. It's possible. I think that's one of, probably 100 factors. And, the video that we saw was a small microcosm of people. If there was 1,000 there that night. So I'm conceding it's feasible, but, if you were to look at probability, it's one of quite a few options. And there's a psychological component to understanding rioters who, at certain points, maybe not in this conversation, but in conversations we've been a part of with, people like Logical and Johnny, where we've said rioters, they take risks they wouldn't take, i.e. the reason they attacked, I think it was Johnny that said they really need to, the defense really needs to put on what did he say? Needs to get a specialist on the stand to talk about the mentality of rioters and how people in protests and groups will act crazy and will go after somebody with a gun. I don't know that we can draw a conclusion that rioters are that worried about guns, or because somebody was shot. I can't draw that conclusion because there's so many other factors. But I'll concede that it is feasible.
Okay, so I know you said you got to go pretty soon, and we put a good 2.5 hours into this, so I want to thank you for. Go ahead.
Yeah,
I'm going to give you a moment to respond. I'm just letting
Yeah.
setting it up for. Hey, I understand you got to go, so
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead and say your thing. Oh, and let me do this real quick. Super chat. V Radio, consider being less long-winded with rebuttals so each point could be addressed better by your guest. We actually addressed that earlier, but I let him be long-winded too.
I was long-winded at times.
Yeah, I think I only stopped you like one time. It was just because I wanted to clarify something, but that was, it just, and it's one of the reasons why I don't like having an adversarial conversation in my own stream. Under certain if we were going to have a real debate, I'm really a big fan of people who put very rigid, like, okay, you got 5 minutes, and then literally will mute people. Like don't let people interrupt each other. Definitely don't let people attack each other. My problem is it's extremely difficult to find a moderator that I trust that will hold to that. And unfortunately, there's an incentive because a lot of people like the blood sport debate to just let people shit on each other over and over again. And I don't have any interest in that, but I know that there are people that do like that sort of thing. That Samantha person that I just fought with the other day on Discord, that's like their whole thing is shitting on people, I guess. So anyway, side note. So, but yeah, we were both kind of long-winded today. That was just kind of the thing. It's been a while since I've done this. So anyway, but go ahead and say what you were going to say before I brought up that super chat.
Yeah, I think. Well, I want to thank you for having me on, and I want to thank all the commenters I really enjoyed watching all the comments. I'm going to share these with my wife later. She's going to get a kick out of them. But I think for me, the way I want to sort of frame my whole position is based on how we govern as a society. And there's a whole conversation about guns I could have in my view on guns and the data that's out there. I've done a lot of research on the numbers as far as guns and homicides and how complicated society's gotten since we've taken off regulations on guns. And I think for me, when I look at this, the reason why I bring up the now versus the later is if I'm making a statement about what I deem acceptable now, that has a causal effect on how people make decisions in the future. And it's all well and good. And this is my problem. And this is something that we won't be able to discuss now, or we may never be able to discuss. But if let's say we were to agree that people can pick and choose when they want when we say a mandate, the reason we have democracy is people vote, and an individual can't make a decision on what the majority wants in their own time based on their own judgment in isolation. And I think whenever I make a decision on something specifically like what's happened in Kenosha, the reason I err on the side of you stay away unless you have a mandate to do so is specifically what does that imply for future events? If this is okay now, what does that mean in the future? And what are the impacts of that? And I think those are the points that we've debated, but that's just the overarching issue I have. And again, I understand why people disagree with it. I understand why people who are gun owners feel that nothing can go wrong. And I'm not saying you've said that, by the way. You were very clear that it's not a perfect solution, but I feel like it's a complicated matter. And I think to overly simplify it and say, yeah, actually, I don't see a problem with it. It's perfectly fine. There's nothing that can go wrong with it. That's where I have a problem. And I think that's the view I'm going to go with.
You got a compliment here. I'll take you over a liberal Dan. Shawn. It's the other guy I debated with. Yeah, you're doing way better than him.
Well, I don't debate. This is only the second time I've ever done a proper debate, and I don't know. Like I don't feel like I represented myself particularly well, but I feel like I got my ideas across. It's a really complicated thing to talk about.
I think you did. I just think that there comes a point where there's we can discuss the framing of something, but like the reality of what happened, we can talk about that. But one thing I want to say, and I don't want to get into guns with you just now, but if you're researching that and that's something you're going to talk to people about, the point that I would make, because I lived in the ghetto, is that while you're doing that, I hope that you recognize that, for example, the crime statistics in countries that have banned guns, like where you are in the United Kingdom, it's much harder to get firearms in the hands of criminals in the United Kingdom than it is in the United States. We are on the border share a giant border with a country that is sadly mostly run by a criminal cartel. The vast majority of especially like the really dangerous weapons that the gangs owned where I lived, did not by any means come from Dick's Sporting Goods. They came from usually like across the border. So you got to look at it from the frame of like, it's a different situation for us than it is for other countries that that don't have a huge crime-ridden country right on their southern border. And I want to be clear, that's not the fault of the Mexicans. That's why so many of them come here, because they're sick of the cartel. But on a second note, I think that my problem with what you're suggesting, and I want to be clear, is that yes, the ideal would be the state takes action. The reason that there's a problem when people talk about whether or not the police can do their jobs and who's hindering that, I hope that you would also recognize that the anti-police rhetoric that in many cases now has just gotten to the point where it's just silly. Like, you should definitely watch, if you haven't already, you should check out the Strategic Eye show, because he's a black police officer and he does a fantastic job of
I've seen a few of his bits.
Breaking these things down. Is that it's getting harder to do the police's job because we have some pretty unrealistic expectations of like what cops are supposed to do. Like, there is unfortunately a large, vocal, and irrational contingent of people that have some pretty unrealistic ideas about how use of force happens, what the best ideal situation is. Like when I did my Jacob Blake video, I pointed out, they're like, well, why did they shoot him for trying to go into his car? And I played like 3 different videos of the perpetrator gets back into his car, grabs his gun, and kills 2 cops. That's why. There are so many people who try to break that down who don't understand what goes into policing. Like, a perfect example of that would be the pastor who was openly like a Black Lives Matter protester, and then they had him do the use of force test, and he totally failed. Not only did he shoot innocent people, he got killed in the test over and over and over again, because it's so much more complicated than they think, which is why I agree with you on the importance of training. But that brings us back to a pro-police narrative of well-funded, well-trained, and as a consequence of that, well-paid police officers. And the left can't have it both ways. We can't say, well, we only want the police to respond. We do not want private citizens to respond, but we also somehow don't want police to be well-funded or equipped. Like that you can't do both.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. I think that is a ridiculous point of view.
Good, and I'm glad that we agree on that.
Yeah. If you ever do, and I'm happy if it is something you want to talk about. I've done a hell of a lot of comparative research, other countries in the U.S., and there's some interesting things there that don't necessarily. By saying the one thing I struggle with is when people say, and I think this is where I disagreed with Johnny. He said I wouldn't even consider data from another country because it's irrelevant. I think that's a disingenuous way to look at it. No offense, Johnny. Just I don't think if you can simply ignore data because you don't see a parallel. And I've had so many conversations with people that say, well, in London there's knife crime. Actually, there's less knife crime in London than in most cities in America. So I think there are some things we can learn from it, and I think there's an evolved conversation that needs to happen with guns in general, in how we make sure that the people that have the guns know which is the bangy end and which is the handle end.
Right. Shawn, you held a decent conversation. I appreciate that. Keep thinking. Keep your mind open to new ideas. It's from Winning Reality. He also
Thank
has
you,
a
Winning
channel.
Reality.
He
Appreciate
and
it.
I are going to do a stream at some point. Just haven't managed to figure it out. So, I guess, so I think we've come to a fairly decent place to stop. I wanted to kind of make sure that we're clear on what the resolution, well, wasn't resolution, but the end was that I still feel that, unfortunately, whether citizens, whether it's that it's not preferable that this should happen, but that citizens still should reserve the right to be able to protect themselves, their property, and others and their property. And that is what I feel those people were motivated by doing that evening. You feel that I think that the better solution would be that the state should take a more active hand in it. Okay. And the funny thing is I don't disagree with you that the state shouldn't be doing that. My issue is that when the fail safe is there, if everything's blown, something's wrong, the cops are not responding, then I that citizens should still be able to act. And
Yeah, I think that's a fair point there. I think that we can say this is our big disagreement point. Is
right.
I understand why you believe that, and I think that's the difference. I don't think it's safe to I don't think that's a safe measure for it. I think that has impacts elsewhere, and I think from your perspective that is the fail safe. Yeah, it does have impacts, but I'm willing to accept it given the alternative, and I think that's a good summary for where our positions are.
All right. Well, I want to thank you again for coming on, Shawn. I'm going to stay on just a little bit afterwards
Yeah,
to talk to my chat, and I appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing what you do in your Second Amendment investigations. I just what I will say, one more thing that occurred to me, because this comes up a lot, is that I don't mind talking about what's going on in other countries. Just don't get yourself caught up in a situation where that is something that for some reason is only selectively applied. So, for example, the left, which, on this issue I'm part of, will bring up, for example, that third world country, not third world, that Nordic countries all have Medicare for all, and they'll say it's working just fine there. And then you bring up, for example, the fact that the abortion laws are actually considerably not as free as they are over here. Like in other countries, actually, like the abortion laws are, way more limiting. Then they don't want to talk about what's going on in other countries. Then it's irrelevant. This is the United States. This is not that country. And I'm not bringing this up to argue about abortion. What I'm getting at is that if we're going to discuss what goes on in other countries, it needs to be a clause that goes both ways in good faith. Because the other answer that I would give them is that, okay, well, yeah, you're right. The abortion laws are definitely rougher in other countries, but at the same time, many of those countries also have Medicare for all and all kinds of social safety nets to help moms. So that's where the conversation, I feel, needs to go full circle. People aren't doing that. They're just kind of cherry picking. Well, this country does this country does that. But I think you would understand and agree with me when you can't compare, say, Denmark's position on guns to a country that lives on the border of Mexico. It's a different scenario.
No, but I don't think we can ignore. I think when we, not to go down the rabbit hole, and I'll be quick. I think when we look at how, like, where Johnny's from, Oklahoma, how their gun laws, I think, are a problem. Their lack thereof, I think, they're a problem. And in no way am I saying take away anyone's guns. I just feel like the lack of there's somewhere in between taking your guns away and doing whatever the fuck you want. I think there's some middle ground in there, and I think the inability of people to discuss that is problematic.
Sure. Well, thanks for coming on, and
thanks
I
for
hope
having me.
you'll come on again sometime, because everybody was kind of rough on you, and I do want to say this before you leave, is that it's really important that people understand that it's really important that people can have these kinds of conversations in a civil fashion. Okay, maybe people don't like that you didn't agree at the end of it, but this is so much better than Kevin Glowicki screaming, "You weren't fucking there, bro!" Blah 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 blah. That was so unproductive. So if you have somebody who disagrees with you and is willing to discuss it with you in the manner that the two gentlemen on this broadcast, speaking of myself in the third person, did, then we need to remember, guys, that that's kind of what we're hoping for. And I remember, to your credit, I remember you saying once, I think it was on the Paul stream, you said that after listening to Johnny and Paul's perspective, that you changed some of your own perspectives
Yeah, I
about
did.
guns, for example. So that means mission accomplished to me. If people are willing to review it, and I get PMs all the time from different right-leaning people who have said, "Hey, I watched your videos and I revised some of my views." That to me is the accomplishment. You're not going to get anybody to just hyper flip right there in front of you and convert. That doesn't happen.
I remember you typing that actually, and it made me think it was something maybe for another time, because I know you didn't intend it that way, but for someone like myself coming on, I came on knowing I wasn't going to win any hearts and minds, because, and I appreciate the context when you said to the person, I think it was something, he's listening, he's reachable.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't take that as what's the word? I forget what it is, but I didn't take that as a negative. But at the same time, in my mind, I went on thinking, okay, my position isn't necessarily going to be considered or looked at in seriousness. The purpose of this conversation was to educate me and to get me up to speed. But that doesn't mean that I can't still share my ideas and hope that maybe some of my ideas might help influence you at the same time.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, and I get it. I guess that's what I was getting at, is just at this point that the fact that these conversations can happen without the cussing and the personal attack and all of that stuff, that just doesn't help. That to me is again, that's the reason why I do this channel. That's the reason why I do my work. So thanks again for
I'll
coming
let you
on.
get back to it. And to everyone on the chat, I can't wait to read back these messages. So I'll have a look at that. And have a good night, everybody.
Thanks again, Shawn. Thanks again. So, guys, thanks for doing this journey with me. It's now been 2 hours and 45 minutes. I appreciate all of you. Thank you for the super chats today. If you can support me, I would appreciate it, because I am still disabled, still in a lot of pain, still can't walk. Having a lot of car problems has been unfortunately putting me further in debt. And this is one of the things I can do, is do this work for people like you. I really hope that you enjoyed this. And again, when it comes to like the long-winded thing, that's why I was trying to say is it's the reason I don't usually have adversarial conversations on my own stream, is that where do you stop? When's the right part to stop? That's one of the reasons also, like, why Tam wants me to go on a lot of these Twitch panels, and I get why she wants me to do that. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just that your conversation style starts to change, because if you're on a Twitch panel, these people will fucking invite like 12 people to a conversation. I can't stand it, but I understand that that's the nature of things. So like at that point, I'm fighting to get a word in edgewise. Like I remember actually when I was on Adam Friended the other day, actually it wasn't Adam Friended, it was Sitch and Adam, when I was debating critical race theory. There were things that I should have said, wanted to say, but I did not get to say them. And it's because I was on a panel with like 7 people, so it's a different situation. But in any case, this is definitely something, Johnny says this is not an interview. Your dialogue link was fine. Well, and also I let him talk like a lot, and that's kind of where it's at. And I've had that problem in the past sometimes where I don't let a guest talk enough. But as you pointed out, it wasn't an interview. So, but in any case, as far as like a time limit for the stream, Scrappy, is that what you mean? Like, how long should the stream be? I never know, like, if I'm making them long enough, because like you guys freaking watch Sitch and Adam streams that are like hours long, man. Please like this, smack the like button. I would really appreciate that, guys, if nothing else, because the algorithm does not like me. Share this video, share this channel, make people aware of me by word of mouth, because it's really the only way. If you go to hy.page-v radio, you can also join me on Discord. We have a lot of great conversations on Discord. I have Telegram, I have Facebook. It's really the only way to be sure you're going to get my stuff, because a lot of people tell me that they're getting unsubscribed. A lot of people tell me that they don't get notifications. It's just the way the algorithm works. I am not following the rules, okay, to make the algorithm like me. I'm not. So, and I'm kind of under the impression that that's one of the reasons why a lot of you guys are here, is that I don't follow the rules. I do curse. I do say the word pedophile, which apparently you're not allowed to say. I do show raw footage of shootings. I do, So if that's what you like and that's what you appreciate, then inevitably that's going to mean you guys are going to have to boost the signal, because that's not what YouTube pushes. And not all of it, I think, is political. Sometimes it's just, my videos are not appropriate for all viewers. That's just the truth. They're not, you know. So as a consequence of that, though, if you like this, and that's what I've been told, that you like the fact that, I didn't just talk about a guy getting hit and having his jaw broken in Kenosha, that you can actually watch the raw video on my channel, then I'm going to need your help. That's just with sharing the algorithm. That's free. Throw me on your Facebook, throw me on your Twitter, throw me wherever. That's really the best way, as Temple always says. Where can you find these live stream rules? I don't know where they get all this stuff. There's just certain understandings. I know, like, for example, in YouTube, it openly says, well, controversial topics can literally get you demonetized just because it's controversial. Okay, so for example, I brought Grambo on, and that was an awesome interview for me, and I thought it was going to blow up because nobody could get Grambo. She wasn't comfortable going on CNN. Good decision. Wasn't comfortable going on any mainstream media. So then I tried to run a Google ad for my show, and they literally would not take my money because of what they referred to as shocking content. And that's just a video of me talking to a woman. Like, we didn't even show any footage, but they wouldn't let me advertise that broadcast because of shocking content. So I guess, they're just, that's what it is Google's afraid of strong women. So, Mac versus PC. What? Mac versus PC could be controversial. Yeah, it is pretty controversial. And unfortunately, I can't afford to be a Mac guy. When I was younger, I was. I still think they're more reliable in a lot of ways. But in any case, there are other streams that I have coming on. There's a Welsh fellow who wants to interview me. I still haven't gotten that done. There's another podcast that's asked me to come on. So a lot of it is going to come down to, guys, if you guys want to see this channel, I was stuck at like 4,200 subscribers, and it just didn't move for like the last 3 months. And the only thing that moved that was Good Logic brought me on, Sitch and Adam brought me on, and that's really the only thing to do it, What were we supposed to take away from this stream? What were we supposed to learn or think about? I think it's really about two people exchanging the viewpoints of like one side versus the other, and then taking what you get from it. I agree that maybe this wouldn't move anybody, but like he said, he didn't really think he's going to win any hearts and minds. But I gave the pushback that I needed to, and to be honest with you, I just if I'm fine with the end result of it, other than just to say I do not agree with the idea that if we feel that the state is failing us, that we should just sit there and let the criminals do their thing, which he said is not what he believes, but it kind of amounts to exactly that. That's really the best we could do. I held him accountable to the things that I think were important, but in the end of the day, I think there's a basic moral difference, in his perspective, and I don't think that's going to change. So in many cases, this kind of thing is just like, it's just a matter of inevitably, some of these people are not going to be able to change their attitudes about things. It's just the way it is, unfortunately. And as Johnny Walker points out, he's been stuck at 780 for months, and I noticed that his growth is not going up. And if you guys have not checked out Johnny Walker Dread's channel, you really need to, guys. You guys would really like his content. If you guys are new to my channel because of Good Logic or because of Sitch and Adam, you guys should check out Johnny Walker Dread. His production quality, as far as like his talks, is actually better than mine. And I think you'll really enjoy his take on things. Particularly, he does a lot of videos about the shootings. He does videos about Kyle Rittenhouse. There's a shitload of those. So if you haven't checked out Johnny Walker Dread, there's a reason that he's under my featured channels on my channel. You should definitely do that. Logical Checkmate, he was in here earlier. I don't think he's here right now, but that's another guy you guys should check out. Strategic Eyes, I mentioned him earlier. African-American cop, really great guy. Yeah, Johnny, share your link if they can't find you, man. People are asking about you. Because he's somebody that the algorithm is just not giving any love either, man. So, oh yeah, here we go. So Logical Checkmate, if you haven't checked out his channel, that's actually how I learned about Shawn, was because, he had a good faith conversation with Paul. Paul's from the Czech Republic. He does an excellent job of, just kind of giving a European sanity view on things going on here in the United States, and he also did a fantastic job explaining what's really going on in Ukraine. So if you haven't, that's probably my favorite of his videos. You guys should check it out. It's also entertaining. But yeah, Johnny Walker just shared a link here to his YouTube channel. Paul, if you want to drop your link in there too, meaning Logical Checkmate, I'd appreciate that. Lots of love. You guys should also, if you haven't checked out Neo Unrealist, Neo Unrealist is great. If you like my content, you would like his. He's a New Yorker. He does a lot of very similar content, even though we're from politically different groups. He and I are on the same side of arguments constantly on Twitter, backing each other up. And Good Logic, obviously, he does a stream like every night at 10 p.m. That guy has been so helpful to me. He and I are actually going to be working on a project going forward where we're going to discuss how society changes its views on things and what it takes to, basically when does something become accepted? Because I talked to him about this weird thing going on the left right now where it's like, whether it's critical race theory or, the LGBTQ curriculum in schools, they start off with this: the thing is not happening and nobody actually supports that thing. And then as more evidence comes out, it becomes, well, the thing is still not happening, but yeah, we do support the thing. Then eventually it's like, okay, fine, the thing is happening and it should be. We support the thing. And if you don't support the thing, it means you're a racist, sexist, misogynist, what I call the shotgun blast of oppression. If you don't agree with the thing, then that means that you are a bigot. It can't possibly be that, maybe you've read critical race theory documents and decided perhaps this isn't as appropriate for children. It can't be that, maybe perhaps, you've looked at like some of the people that are involved in expanding on the LGBTQ content within curriculum for children and you don't agree with it, or the proliferance of pedophiles who keep showing up, pedophile teachers. And I just did two videos on that. I actually just got invited on another stream specifically to discuss minor attracted persons. That's going to be on Twitch. I will link that. I will probably just have, what I do is sometimes I have my daughter go on her computer and then rebroadcast, on my account so that you guys can watch stuff here that I'm doing on other channels. Just be aware of the fact that when I'm on someone else's Twitch panel, I don't have any control over those people, who got picked, who didn't. If you guys haven't checked out the two videos that I just did on the topic of the LGBTQ, trans curriculum stuff being forced, into school curriculums, you really should, because I just uncovered a woman by the name of Heather Karina, who writes curriculum for schools. And she had an article on her website literally just calling for an end to any stigma about sex between adults and children. Like, that's not a paraphrase. She just openly said it. And that woman's books are being circulated in schools right now. They're trying to push her stuff into the curriculum, and her website, Scarletine, is like considered to be the premier website for sexual education. And that woman just openly stated that kids should just be allowed to have sex with adults, and and that should be it. As far as like, I don't think you should rebroadcast Twitch. If they find out, they could ban your host. I don't know what you mean by host. The reason I go to Twitch, I don't think I'm going to last long on Twitch, because they're pretty. I don't know how I've lasted as long as I have, really, because I haven't changed anything. I just kind of gave up, because aside from when I'm getting rated, I don't. Twitch is kind of hard to get into. So, but either way, if you guys want to watch me on Twitch, this broadcast is currently going on my Twitch channel too. I haven't seen anybody over there. Like, if people do view it, I do interact with the chat because it pops up on my StreamYard. But that's basically been it. The person whose stream you will be on, I don't know. I'll look into that. They don't usually mind. I mean, I'm on there anyway, but I'll look into it. So Thanks again, everybody. We're now going on 3 hours. Do not forget, if you have not, please please leave a comment. That's also something that helps me with the algorithm. If you can financially support this, we're now up to 4,600, I think. If you guys all even just did Patreon for $1 a month, not only would I be set, that'd be fantastic, and I don't even actually want all of you. Like I said, I don't really care about making a lot of money. I'm just trying to be whole. As to where I was before, I'm content to continue to remain poor white trash. It's more about struggling to survive at this point. But either way, it doesn't take much. You can also do it on PayPal if you don't like Patreon. I got people who do it on PayPal. And Subscribestar recently changed their policy, so now I can actually get the money you guys give me from Subscribestar without it having to get to $150 first. So if you guys want to do that, that would be fantastic. Any support you can give me would be good, because especially when I do these, like that last one I did, that literally I got up at 9 in the morning. I got the scoop on that, and then I spent 12 hours researching it before I made the video. And the videos in many cases are only 15 minutes long. That does not reflect anything that as far as to the work that went into it. And the reason why it takes so much is because of the fact that I have to find ironclad sources for everything I say. And they have to be sources that are ironclad, that come from a perspective that the left that I'm arguing with cannot just simply say, well, that's fucking Fox News, So I got to find MSNBC articles on a topic. I have to find the Hill topics. I have to find, all kinds of stuff that, and these people are not inclined to do this kind of thing. I got to find local news networks, from maybe more ABC, NBC I'm sorry, ABC, that is a little less partisan, So it takes hours to find these kinds of links. And it's not because I can't find other links, about something. If I want to find anything that's, negative of the left, I'm sure I could pull up Fox's website and get it in a few seconds. But my objective is I need to be unapproachable. This is one of the reasons why a lot of people will not debate me, is I come ready. And it's not to say I've never been wrong about anything, but what it is the reason why you don't frequently see me being wrong is because I'm very careful about not running off on the mouth about something. If I haven't finished my view on it, I don't usually talk about it at all. Like when my abortion video, when I did that, that pissed off a lot of people, but I made clear, I'm like, I still haven't fully formulated my viewpoints on this, guys, but I'm talking about the talk, and that pissed some people off, but it's like, okay, well, this is my view on it. Sorry, you know. What is this? Like, shit, dude, you're anal as hell. I just looked at your links. Make it quicker. Well, dude, it's like I like the silence when they suddenly realize, fuck, I don't have anything on this. That's really satisfying. Did I ever find the George Takei video? No, I have not. Apparently that's on Howard Stern. So I'm going to do a video about that eventually. But George Takei has recently been speaking out, saying shit like, that there is no grooming going on. You don't need to worry about grooming. Come to find out, George Takei lost his virginity at the age of 13 to an adult camp counselor, when he was 13, and openly told everybody that that's how he lost his virginity. Meanwhile, George Takei is saying that there is no grooming going on. By the way, grooming is apparently another one of those words. We're not allowed to say groomer. It's like when you go on with good logic, because he is doing that, for professional reasons. Like, there's so many words I'm supposed to not say. And it really reminds me, I want to do like a parody on George Carlin's, like, what is it, 12 words you're not allowed to say on TV or something like that, because that's basically the way it is. And go to the root. That's right, the root. Like, winning reality. Speaking of the root, kind of a play on words. Did you watch my video where the root brought this woman on to explain CRT, and she went on to say that it was an accurate, depiction of history, and then said that people of color never engaged in imperialism or violence until white people showed up. I was like, yeah, there you go. That's an accurate portrayal of history. No black people engaged in any imperialism. Not even apparently the people who literally got the slaves to sell by engaging in imperialism, obviously, right? So that's why I like that video in particular was so fantastic, because this is the Root making a video for the Root Institute, bringing on a professor from Rutgers who is a critical race theory, gender studies teacher, like supposedly the most capable. I mean, like, what are they going to tell me? What do they always say? Well, if you want to understand critical race theory, stop watching Fox News. Stop watching this or that, which I don't watch anyway. But I'm like, all right, well, here's a video from The Root, which is supposed to be a Black issues network, where they brought on a professor to discuss what critical race theory is, and she said some shit that was just flat out Black supremacist. And she openly also said, like, my first instinct is we just got to take these motherfuckers out, in a reference to white people. So anyway, and definitely not the creators of the slave trade. You are right. I did a whole video in response to everything's going to be all white. I haven't, it's actually a couple of them, and one of them was specifically to the whitewashing of the slave trade, because apparently, according to anthropologists, the slavery was created in the Middle East initially, and then it spread around, and then ironically, because I actually get to participate in a Twitter argument between Sitch and Adam and the serfs, because they said, the serfs said, well, the United States ended slavery later than everybody else. So I posted my pictures from it, like with literally the dates of when every country outlawed slavery, and the United States came out way ahead of the majority of the countries in Africa itself, for example. Oh, look, there is somebody on Twitch. Hi there, Liquidator. Yeah, well, it'll still be here. It'll be archived. I think you'll enjoy it. You should totally check that out. And yes, I agree. The serfs are fucking clowns. Oh my goodness. Like, if I could ever, like, that when Sam Cedar debated Destiny on Kyle Rittenhouse, that was the one I wish Sitch and Adam had brought me on for. They have said if they ever debate Sam Cedar and Kyle Rittenhouse that they're going to ask me to come on. That'll be fireworks. But as King Brandon says, once in a while I'll watch a clip from Fox News. It's a couple of minutes long. They're better than CNN, but they just feel plastic and unauthentic. Right? They all just seem like they have their kind of view on things, not that they're catering to a specific audience. And the reality is that it's just, I mean, the fight between the right and the left versus when it comes to the media or the government is about as real as the feud between John Cena and Randy Orton at WrestleMania. It's all meant for your entertainment and distraction. And at the end of the day, those people will get a beer together. It's so easy to forget how much the people in the media are making too. But yeah, I agree. Cedar is a fucking bad faith dude. Like, he had to talk about the buckets of cum that Destiny said he'd be gurgling if a leftist had shot a right version. He had to talk about that for like an hour, man. Africa, that is where America bought them. USA didn't just go over there and capture them. Yep, I know. And that's part of the false narrative about this. So, and isn't that happening in Yemen? Slaves for sale? Well, when you watch my video, Sterling, I go over the fact that yes, there is still slavery going on in Africa. And some of those countries didn't even outlaw slavery. And I think one of them was Ethiopia until like 1940 something. And even with the outlawing, it doesn't matter because it's still happening and they don't really do anything about it. Yes, and he was definitely obsessed with the buckets. Buckets! He wouldn't stop talking about it. It's because he was sore that Destiny, said that about it, and it's so stupid. But, something the left doesn't want to talk about. That's right, logical checkmate. We'll smack the like button. Libya is still selling? Yep, that's true. So, all right, folks, 3 hours and 7 minutes and counting. I hope you enjoyed this broadcast. Thank you, everybody, for your super chats, your support on PayPal, your support on Patreon. One of the other reasons why the Patreon thing is hurting is that, unfortunately, Ray Powell, you'll know I shared some of his videos. He was actually one of my biggest patrons. He was giving me like $100 a month. That's how much that guy believed in me. He passed away, sadly. So all of a sudden, what was a significant, helpful part of my income now is just kind of an afterthought. So if you can, donate, please do, in whatever fashion you feel you can. If you're not in a financial position to do so, just please share the shit out of my stuff. And if for some reason I ever stop broadcasting, please share the hell out of my stuff, because it probably means something happened to me. My health is not great. So if for some reason that happens, the best way you could remember me would be please share the hell out of the stuff. At that point, it won't even be for financial reasons. My motivations about this are not, I can't stand that that lies are being told and they're not being countered, and that's why when I get on big, for example, big streams like Good Logic or whatever, yeah, cool, I'd like to have more listeners, but it more has to do with the fact that I really want to help. When I got, contacted by people, particularly on the left, who contacted me privately and said, thank you for making your video. You totally changed my view about Kyle Rittenhouse. That to me is a touchdown, But to do that, to be able to convince people to change their views on things, you got to be rock solid, man. And that's why, some of the people on the right who follow the show have told me that they've revised some of their views because of what I said. That isn't going to happen if I'm full of shit, is it? And so anyway, thanks again, folks. And, if you have any topics that I haven't covered or any guests you'd like me to bring on, don't forget to come to the Discord channel and tell me. I do interact with my Discord. My Discord is not there. You don't have to pay to be in there, and it's not like some kind of grift. Like, I know, as much as I like Shawn Head, you pay to be a patron to get on her Discord, and she's never in there and doesn't talk to anybody. So it's bullshit. My Discord is legit. If you go there and you address me, I will answer you. So thanks again, folks. Until next time.